John, are you ready? Tom. Order, order. I invite the Speaker's chaplain to lead us in a minute's silence.
Please, may I invite you to rise. We keep a moment of remembrance and respect, honouring Sir David Amess, the Honourable Member for Southend West, colleague and friend. May the bright memory of his rich life ever outshine the tragic manner of his death. Let us keep silence.
Thank you. I'm sorry the House is returning in such tragic circumstances. Since we last met, we have lost two outstanding friends and colleagues, Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire. I know honourable and right honourable members from all parts of this House will share my deep sadness at their loss and will want to join me in sending out heartfelt condolences to their families. The circumstances of Sir David's death were despicable and they raised the most fundamental issues about how members of this House are able to perform our vital democratic responsibilities safely and securely. In light of the ongoing police investigation, I will not say more about the events, but I give the House my undertaking that I will do everything within my power to ensure that these issues are treated with urgency and with the sense of priority that they deserve. I know that whatever political differences there are in the House, all members want to ensure not just that we and our staff are able to work safely, but our democracy itself, with the local Member of Parliament at the heart of our constituency, is able to function securely. On that, I know the House is united. The House will want to pay tribute to both Sir David and to James, and I hope it will be useful if I set out how I expect us to be able to do so. On Wednesday, after Prime Minister's questions, there will be an opportunity for tributes to be paid to James Brokenshire. Today's planned substantive business in the Chamber and the Westminster Hall will not be proceeded with. Instead, we will have Home Office questions, followed by an opportunity to pay tributes to Sir David Amess on a motion for adjournment to be opened by the Prime Minister. At 6 p.m, there will be a service of prayer and remembrance to commemorate Sir David at St Margaret's Church. I expect the House to adjourn approximately at 5:30 p.m. for those members who wish to attend the service, then to proceed from this chamber to St Margaret's. I know many members want to speak, and if we can bear that in mind, it will help us all that we get it on the record. And just to say, there will be books of condolence for members to sign, along with staff as well. So please, let us now move to questions to the Home Secretary. We now come to Cheryl Murray.
One, please, Mr. Speaker.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I come on to my response, I will pay my tribute shortly to our dear friend Sir David. But I want to echo your words and start by saying that his killing is a terrible and sad moment In our history, an attack on our democracy and an appalling tragedy, and we are all thinking of David, Julia and their family. And I would, Mr. Speaker, like to echo your words about our dear, dear colleague, James Brokenshire, the Member of Parliament for Old Bexley and Sidcup, who bravely battled cancer over the last year. And James, Cathy and their children are absolutely in all our thoughts. In response to question number 1, Mr. Speaker, these protests are extremely dangerous. They have caused great economic harm, they have caused misery and distress to the law-abiding public, and they have also prevented members of the public from going about their daily business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, we saw the worst type of illegal protest, where my good friend was stabbed as he did his job. Mr. Speaker, I hope to catch your eye later and give my own tribute to this most excellent fellow, and I thank you for making this possible. I know, sadly, on this occasion, it was one of our colleagues, but will the government review how we help to keep those safe, all of those people who work in public-facing roles?
My honourable friend, I echo the words of my honourable friend, actually, in terms of her remarks and the points that she has made. And, of course, we have a duty and a responsibility, and there is a great deal of work taking place right now with Mr. Speaker, with our police forces across the country, to do exactly that. And there'll be further updates over the next few days, particularly for members of Parliament, but also in terms of wider public protection.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, too, also pay tribute to Sir David Amess. I never managed to persuade him to support gay marriage, but he always asked after my husband, and I think that that was the character of the man. The difficulty is judging what the boundary is between legal and illegal protests, because some people protesting online use vile abuse. They think that that's perfectly justifiable. We seem to have developed a toxic way of doing our politics. How do we simply change that so that we become a bit more like Sir David, and for that matter, a bit more like James?
Well, my right friend actually raises, I think, actually something that has just been captured actually by the mood of the nation around the discourse that we have in public life. Now, clearly, the online space, we see far too much cruelty online. And I think all of us have a responsibility and a duty to work together. And I do think working together is part of the solution here. And then, of course, when it comes to this place and to public life and politics, I would use one word, and that is respect.
Julian Sterling.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by associating myself with the remarks of the Home Secretary with regard to James Brokenshire, who I worked with over the last 15 years on all manner of subjects. He was a lovely man and a pleasure to know. It's also a poignant moment as I group this question with question 5 to realise that he would have spotted, Sir David would have spotted the subject of these two questions, and given his long interest in animal welfare, should in any just world be bobbing behind us now to ask a question. Mr. Speaker, stealing from a pet from its loving owner is a particularly cruel crime, causing heartbreak for families and great distress to the pet. The Home Office is working with the police to ensure pet thefts are recorded in a consistent manner and readily identifiable within Forces information management systems across England and Wales. The Pet Theft Task Force has recently made a series of recommendations which we're considering, and we will introduce a new criminal offence for pet abduction.
As well, wasn't it, Minister? Yeah. So, Julian Sterling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by adding my tribute to Sir David? He was dedicated, as the Minister said, dedicated his career for better animal welfare. And I know that this topic was one that was very close to his heart, and he had been lobbying the Minister very hard on. Mr. Speaker, as we continue to see the rise in pet theft by criminal gangs who are using these proceeds to fund further criminal activity, does the Minister agree that we have to bring forward legislation on this as quickly as possible? We cannot delay any further. And can the Minister give us a clear timescale on when we're going to see this legislation and we can vote on this important legislation in this House?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that unfortunately one of the effects of the pandemic, particularly the rise in the value of pets, particularly dogs and cats, who have been happily in demand by many families who look to them for companionship, has brought with it a criminal phenomenon which we need to address. The task force has made a number of recommendations, and while I can't give the honourable gentleman an absolute timetable today, he has our undertaking that we are keen to move as swiftly as possible to give him the opportunity to put this offence on the statute book.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like other honourable members here, am honoured to ask this question in the memory of Sir David. I met with local residents concerned about pet theft recently in Hanmer, in my constituency in Clwyd South. And what message would the Minister give to those constituents who have been worried about this issue locally?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's typical of the honourable gentleman that he would gather his constituents together to give voice to their concern in this area. I think the message that I would give them is that we recognise their distress and concern. As a dog and a cat owner ourselves, it's inconceivable that our pets might be stolen, and the damage and trauma that would be caused to my family if that awful event were to happen is very keenly in our mind. The policy development work in this particular offence has now begun. And as I said earlier, we hope to bring legislation forward as quickly as possible so that he and the many other members who are very interested in this subject and recognise the distress that's being caused in communities up and down the land by this crime can exercise their free democratic will and put the offence on the statute book.
Simon Baines. Ian Paisley. Not here. Crispin Blunt.
Mr. Speaker, we currently have no plans to reschedule psilocybin to Schedule 2 of the Misuse of Drugs regulations. The Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs has recently published Stage 1 of its advice on reducing barriers to research with controlled drugs. We will consider the advice, including its implications for psilocybin, carefully before responding.
Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend understand the emerging potential of the psychedelic class of drugs with psilocybin to the fore to treat depression, trauma and addiction? Now, some of this science was emerging in the 1960s, before our current drugs laws closed it down. Last year, or in 2019, 90,503 of our fellow citizens were driven to suicide by their depression or trauma, or whose rock bottom in addiction has been death. If there is any scale of potential for these drugs, and it appears that there is, any further delay in getting the science and the research going is not defensible. In fact, it's a morally disgraceful abrogation of our duty to the public good.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a founder of the All-Party Group on Life Sciences, I am well aware of the potential of any number of compounds to assist us in the constant battle against mental and physical illness, and the need for this country to lead in research that might alleviate the problem not just here but in the rest of the world. But the Honourable Gentleman will know that in particular where it comes to rescheduling of particular compounds, we do so where medicines are approved on the advice of the MRHA and of the ACMD. He will know, for example, that in June last year we did place Epidiolex, which is a cannabis-based medicine used to treat certain forms of epilepsy, in Schedule 5 to the Misuse of Drug Regulations, following exactly that sort of advice. There are ongoing trials and research studies into psilocybin taking place into the UK, and while a medicine has yet to be licensed by the MHRA, if and when it is, we will consider rescheduling.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Just to catch up on what was said there, could the Minister actually tell me what research the UK Government is basing its current policy regarding psilocybin on, and can that research be made available?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the research is being undertaken in a number of academic institutions, as far as I'm aware, and I'm happy to dig out the detail of where specifically, I don't have it to hand, it is being researched. But it's worth reinforcing, Mr. Speaker, that the process for the rescheduling compounds is that approval is given for a medicine by the MHRA. Advice is then taken from the ACMD as the rescheduling, as we did do with Epidiolex. And as soon as those medicines are approved by the MHRA for use, I would be happy to consider rescheduling.
Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Question number 6.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to associate myself with the comments made by my ministerial front bench colleagues on the sad loss of our dear colleagues. With your permission, I would like to group this question with question 14. And supporting victims of domestic abuse is a government priority. Building on the landmark Domestic Abuse Act and the Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls strategy published this year, we will also publish a dedicated domestic abuse strategy. And this strategy will drive action to prevent offending, support victims, relentlessly pursue perpetrators and strengthen the system as a whole.
Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I place on record, on behalf of my Mearn Valley constituents and myself, our deep and utter shock about the death of Sir David Amess and also that of James Brockenshire. And can I pass on their deepest condolences to his family, constituents, and many families and their friends here and outside Westminster. In Hampshire over the last year, there were 26,785 domestic abuse offences recorded, with the first period of lockdown showing a 14% increase year on year. Would my right honourable friend continue her support for police and crime commissioners like Donna Jones in Hampshire, who are tackling this dreadful crime as a priority?
Well, can I thank Donna Jones for the way that she has prioritised this crime, backed by an uplift in the Hampshire Police funding settlement. And I can assure her that we'll be working closely with policing colleagues, including police and crime commissioners and the new policing lead for tackling violence against women and girls, Maggie Blythe, to drive forward improvements in policing's response to these crimes. Furthermore, we'll be publishing a refreshed national statement of expectations on violence against women and girls to support local commissioners, including PCCs, in commissioning effective services.
Mr. Speaker, anyone can be a victim of domestic abuse, regardless of gender, age, ethnicity, religion, socio-economic status, sexuality or background. But how many men have been subjected to domestic abuse, and what is offered to them differently to women?
Well, my honourable friend is, of course, absolutely right that men and boys can be victims of domestic abuse and indeed these other crimes that fall under the umbrella of what we call violence against women and girls. And for the year ending March 2020, the Crime Survey of England and Wales estimated that 757,000 men experienced domestic abuse, which is approximately 7 in 100 men. So we have done a lot of work to publish the first ever cross-government male victims position statement to strengthen our response. We do need to refresh the male victims position statement, and we do also fund the men's advice line run by Respect to provide specialist support to these victims.
Sir Desmond Sway.
Sir.
Mr. Speaker, may I also associate myself with the tributes that have been made and will no doubt be made for the rest of the day to both Sir David and to James Brockenshire. They were model parliamentarians and great friends, and we're far poorer in this House for their passing. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to group this question with question 16. Illegal entry to the UK via small boat is unsafe, unfair and unacceptable. We are working tirelessly to make this route unviable through a comprehensive package of measures. There is no one single answer. Our new plan for immigration and the Nationality and Borders Bill will address the challenge of illegal immigration by increasing maximum sentences for people smugglers and making it easier to swiftly remove those who enter the UK illegally.
Sir Desmond Sway.
What urgency does he attach to the implementation of offshore processing along the Australian model?
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for his question, and he will know that the provisions in the bill are comprehensive. They are many and varied. As I say, there is not one single answer to the challenge that we face in relation to these illegal crossings across the Channel. We must make that route unviable, and of course we reserve the right within the bill to do exactly what he is advocating.
Sir David Amess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Nationality and Borders Bill is absolutely key to stopping the vile people smuggling gangs from continuing to facilitate these channel crossings and putting so many lives at risk?
Well, of course, as ever, he gets to the nub of the issue, and as I say, I make the point again because it bears repeating that there is no one single answer to resolving these challenges. But what we do require in swift order is the measures that are set out in the bill. They're comprehensive, they're there to tackle these dangerous crossings. Of course, we need global assistance as well to help us to achieve this. But what we must do is put these evil criminal gangs out of business once and for all and preserve human life. That's exactly what the measures we're proposing seek to do.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to add my sincere condolences to Sir David Amess' family and friends. Sir David was kind to everyone in Parliament, and he will be greatly missed. Last week, Sir David and I were part of a parliamentary delegation in Qatar. During the visit, we met the unaccompanied child refugees who had been evacuated from Afghanistan and are now being housed in a temporary accommodation in Qatar. As many as 13 of these children have family members in the UK and are desperate to be reunited with them. Will the Home Secretary now take steps to urgently facilitate the reunion of these children with their families?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and of course we are working across government on these matters, and I know that there is engagement going on through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office with the authorities that he describes. Of course, we have a proud record, a proud tradition in this country of providing sanctuary for those who find themselves in desperate circumstances. That absolutely continues to be the case. That's a firm commitment that this government has. It's perfectly in line with our proud traditions in this country, and I think people across our country would expect us to continue to do that, and that's exactly what we will do.
SM spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From me and from my colleagues and from the bottom of our hearts, can we send our deepest condolences to the family, friends and colleagues of both Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire. It's fair to say that, in short, everyone knew Sir David and everyone liked and respected him without exception. And in relation to James Brokenshire, I shadowed him as Immigration Minister in my first year in this place, and he made my job 10 times tougher, not only because of his mastery of the brief, but because he too was impossible not to respect until I can move Mr. Speaker, at the last question session, the Home Secretary suggested I hadn't read the Borders Bill when I said that it would see Uyghurs, persecuted Christians and Syrians fleeing war prosecuted and sentenced to prison. But I have read it, and that is precisely what Clause 37 will do. I welcome the Minister to his place, but if he doesn't want to see Uyghurs, persecuted Christians and Syrians prosecuted and imprisoned, will he take that clause out of the bill?
Well, I would expect nothing less from the honourable gentleman, given that we're beginning line-by-line consideration tomorrow in committee, and I've no doubt that he will have studied every single clause very, very carefully and will be interrogating me on each of them. Look, we don't want to see anybody persecuted, and as I've said previously, as a country and as a government, we are absolutely determined to make sure that there continue to be safe and legal routes so that people can continue to access sanctuary in this country where people qualify. And of course, through our international engagement, we always press home that human rights must be respected and upheld at every turn.
John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much warmly welcome the Minister and indeed the Government's forthcoming legislation on this issue, but can I urge him to take utmost haste and speed in delivering it to this House for our consideration? The trade, if you like, of human trafficking is a hideous crime. Lives are being lost now. It's making a laughingstock, I would suggest, of the two systems on both sides of the channel. We need to put a stop to this. It should not be beyond the wit of the government that it be so.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who has consistently been raising these matters, and he is right to say that we want to deliver the provisions of the Nationality and Borders Bill as quickly as possible because we believe that they are fundamental to preventing these dangerous channel crossings as part of an overall package to deliver on that. and I hope that the bill will command support from across the House. He's also right to raise the issue of collaboration with our international partners, and of course the French are integral to that. We have an arrangement with the French. It is bearing results. There is clearly still more to do, but it is the case, Mr. Speaker, that this issue cannot be resolved entirely without that collaboration.
Question 8, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, no illicit drug can be assumed to be safe.
McCarthy.
Right, I want to echo the tributes, obviously, to Sir David Amess and to James Brokenshire, and my commiserations to their friends and family. Over a single weekend in Bristol this summer, one young person died and 20 others were hospitalised, leading to police warnings about a lethal batch of pills circulating in the city. And it's just not enough for the government to say, don't do drugs. That clearly doesn't work. So will the government work with organisations like In the Loop that do provide testing, or provide its own drugs testing service like the Welsh Government has been doing since 2014? That's the only way that you're going to save lives.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're obviously all distressed to hear the news from Bristol, and any life lost to drugs is obviously to be mourned. Anyone interested in lawfully undertaking activities that include the possession, supply or production of controlled drugs, including in the course of drug testing services, can already apply to the Home Office for a domestic licence when they will be subject to the usual visits and considerations about the activities that they undertake. But I do understand the Honourable Lady's implication that we should look at this subject in the round, and it is our hope that we'll publish a comprehensive cross-government strategy on drugs, as I say, in the round, and their impact and what we can do about them later this year.
We now go to Laura Farms.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Cases including the sickening murder of Sarah Everard and the appalling murders of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman have caused immense pain and understandably prompted huge concerns. That's why the Home Secretary commissioned an inspection of the police response to violence against women and girls, and we supported the recommendation to appoint a full-time national policing lead to drive forward progress on this hugely important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to extend my deepest sympathies to the families of Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire. Southend has lost 2 sons, and we've lost 2 very special parliamentary colleagues. I'd also like to recognise the work that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has been doing over the last few very challenging weeks, which have had damaging implications for the relationship between the police and the safety of women. Last week, The Times reported that of disciplinary hearings that have been conducted over the last 3 years, over half were held in private and almost no force published the findings. We know how important transparency is when it comes to public confidence, so could my honourable friend say what steps she is taking to ensure that members of the public can see what is going on with their local force?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that public confidence in the policing response is vital in tackling violence against women and girls. And I'm determined, as is the Home Secretary, to do all we can to combat these sickening crimes. We are committed to ensuring that policing is subject to stringent levels of transparency and accountability. Misconduct hearings are chaired independently of forces by legally qualified chairs. Sometimes those hearings must be held in private for several legitimate reasons, but we will be looking at this matter further to make sure that the system is accountable to the public.
Shadow Minister Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, we all on this side of the House wish to be associated with the words of the Home Secretary and send our love and best regards to Sir David's family. He was kind and good, but for me, above all else, he was funny, and he didn't take himself too seriously. And as for James, as the Immigration Minister, he was incredibly approachable and kind, and a good and thorough minister. I wish also just to briefly say, from this side of the House who know how it feels to have someone fall, our love, through you, Mr. Speaker, is with all of those friends and colleagues of those who have died. I simply rise to ask the Minister if her department have decided if they are going to implement all the recommendations and the timeframe laid out in Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Policing report last month in order to improve our national response to violence against women and girls. In September, the Minister told this House that the Home Secretary has committed to considering the report's full recommendations and will update Parliament when she has done so. An update on that position would be welcomed.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her words just now. And clearly the report that has been produced is a very important report, and the Home Secretary and the Home Office are considering that in detail. We have already put into place a number of very important actions, including appointing Detective Chief Constable Maggie Blythe and also chairing a new task force to drive cross-government action. The Home Secretary has also announced an independent inquiry into the issues surrounding Wayne Couzens and wider culture in policing, and she will update the House very soon.
Carl Lockhart.
Question 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we introduced the new skilled worker visa last year, we broadened the skills threshold from the academically focused graduate level under the previous Tier 2 visa to school leaver level, RQF3, to ensure a wider range of skilled work was recognised. This change means roles such as butcher, farmer and poultry processors qualified for the skilled worker route, allowing recruitment on a global level into them.
Carl Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I extend my thoughts and prayers to Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire's family, friends, colleagues and staff today, and I trust that I will have the opportunity to speak later further on this matter. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for meeting with myself and party colleagues on this issue just a short number of weeks ago, and for the actions taken since then to alleviate the labour supply pressures. However, I do fear the short window of opportunity being offered will not be enough to attract the necessary workers. Additionally, our farmers, particularly our pig farmers, are in crisis as we speak in this House today. What additional efforts are being made alongside DEFRA to support this industry, meet the pressing demand for labour, with farms backing up with healthy pigs and abattoirs cancelling 25% of their pig slaughter due to staff shortages?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her supplementary question, and I note that she met the Home Secretary recently to talk about this, and of course events have moved on since, and we've had flexibility on visas. Obviously the issues around cold storage are being addressed, but what is clear is that this is a short-term fix, not a long-term solution, and I think what we must do is continue to focus, and I think people in our country would rightly expect us to focus on what more we can do to make sure that we improve skills and training and wages and terms and conditions, to make sure that the domestic labour market is able to fulfil these roles in the longer term. But we have been responsive to industry's asks, and of course our ears continue to be open.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would have been very appropriate today. David Amess would have been the first to welcome the new Minister of the Dispatch Box, because the three of us worked together on Grassroots Out, and he held the first rally for us. And it's appropriate to this question. Isn't it right, Minister, that the coming out of the European Union gives us the ability to decide on these issues?
Well, thank you to my honourable friend and neighbour for his question, and it won't surprise him to hear that only a couple of weeks ago I received a note from Sir David congratulating me on my appointment, and it is something that I will absolutely treasure in the years ahead. His encouragement was always second to none. The truth is that people like he and I campaigned in the referendum for a global immigration system. That is exactly what we have delivered. I genuinely believe that that is the right approach to immigration for the years ahead, based on skills, recruiting the skills that we need, but also making sure that we do right by the domestic labour market and people in this country by increasing skills, increasing opportunity, increasing training, terms and conditions, and making sure that more readily we can recruit to those roles.
Shadow Minister Banlock-Shorrock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too wish to pay my tributes to Sir David and James Brokenshire and pass on my deepest condolences and sympathies to their families. They were two of the kindest, most decent parliamentarians I've ever met. and I will certainly miss my conversations with Sir David by the lifts in 1 Parliament Street, always with a smile. Mr Speaker, the National Farmers Union have told MPs that there's a chronic shortage of butchers and agriculture workers, which has led to 150,000 pigs being backed up on farms. So I ask the Minister, will the Government add the butchers and agriculture workers to the shortage occupation list, and will the Government agree to review the list earlier than 2022, as is the current plan?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises an interesting question, and he should know that, of course, the Home Office and ministers in the Home Office are working constructively with DEFRA, who, of course, are regularly engaging, no doubt, with the National Farmers Union around these matters. Following last year's MAC Sol review, the government set out its response to stating that the labour market is changing as a result of COVID, and that it is important to assess changes in the labour market before making widespread changes to the Sol. This is particularly true at a time when so many British people still face uncertain times with the ending of furlough. But as I say, we are committed, we have taken steps in the short term to address these challenges that have been raised, but this really is not the long-term solution to these challenges. But of course we're responsive as the situation develops.
Thank you, Speaker. And while I wanted to take the opportunity to welcome my friend to his position on the front bench, he might not welcome what I have to say after I congratulate and echo the comments that he made in condolence of our dear departed colleagues, both David and James. So far we haven't had any facts and figures. What are the numbers of shortages? How many applications have been made and how many visas have been granted?
Well, thank you to my honourable friend for his question. As I say, what we have done is we've been responsive to the needs that have arisen in our economy. We've been engaging with the various sectors who've come forward to raise concerns. For example, there is a commitment to supporting visas for 4,700 HGV food drivers, up to 5,500 poultry workers, 300 fuel drivers. I think the key thing now is that those industries who've sought that extra support and that flexibility through visas now get on and recruit to those roles.
Cat Smith.
Question 11.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I too wish to associate with your words and the Home Secretary's in memory of our two cherished friends, David and James, outstanding parliamentarians both. James, of course, among his many other accomplishments, was also an exceptionally effective and highly respected security minister, in which role he set the enduring example. And as well as colleagues in this House, he is very much missed by officials in the Home Office and by the agencies and partners with which he worked. Mr Speaker, online fraud and scams have a devastating impact, and we are taking action to protect the public and make it harder for fraudsters to operate. And the Online Safety Bill will tackle some of the highest harm frauds online.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I wish to put on record my own condolences to the families of James Brokenshire and Sir David. A lot of people have said that Sir David was a good support to new MPs, but he was also a good support to those of us who were doing things for the first time, and indeed he chaired the first bill committee where I was on the opposition front bench, and he was a great support to me and will be dearly missed from this House. Many of my Fleetwood constituents are seriously concerned about pension scams, which are on the rise, and I pay tribute to the work of Age UK for the awareness that they're raising about the risk of pension scams. So can the Minister tell me what steps he plans to take in terms of the online harms bill, specifically on pension scams?
So, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady is exactly right to identify the wickedness of pension scams, picking on people often at a time of weakness, part of a wider field of investment scams. As she will know, the Online Safety Bill is currently going through pre-legislative scrutiny, which is an opportunity for issues to be fleshed out, but she's absolutely right, government focus remains very much also on the pension scams that she mentions.
Teresa Village.
Can I express my deep sadness at the loss of Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire? And can I also ask the Minister what action the government and the police are taking to protect the elderly in particular from scams? It's one of the most repellent aspects of this type of crime that the criminals particularly prey on the elderly and vulnerable.
Yes, I thank my right honourable friend for that question. It follows on, of course, from what the honourable lady opposite was saying. It's very important that we raise awareness of how to protect yourself against these scams, the things to look out for, that we encourage reporting so that we can build up a wider picture. It's also very important that we focus on victim support when these crimes have occurred and to prevent re-victimisation, and we're increasing our efforts in that area.
Minister Conor McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo what has been said about Sir David Amess? When it comes to James Brokenshire, quite simply, he was everything you'd have wanted in an opposite number. He was cooperative, constructive, but occasionally combative, and I will miss him. I congratulate the new Security Minister, and I think we've already established a similar working relationship. Online harms have been brought sharply into focus during the last 18 months. Fraud and scams, but also extremism, radicalisation and terrorism. The police, security and intelligence services are very concerned, and we sadly know the tragic consequences. Is the Minister satisfied that he can address this in the online safety bill, or are specific and perhaps more urgent actions required? Can I assure him that if they are, we will seek to work with the Government in finding common ground to bring forward any necessary measures?
Well, I'm going to start by thanking the honourable gentleman twice over, first of all for what he said at the start, but also for his expressions of support for doing what we need to do to make sure that these terrible messaging, propaganda and ways of association with the most horrific outcomes and consequences they can have, that we disrupt them and that we thwart these efforts. There are important steps in the online safety bill to do with illegal content, and I think that will improve our arsenal, our toolkit. But there are other things we need to work on as well, in particular the issue of end-to-end encryptment and the deliberate blinding of platforms to themselves against being able to take down very harmful material is something which I look forward to working with him on.
Mr. Speaker, and may I pay respects on behalf of the people of Stroud to the families of Sir David and James Brokenshire. On the BBC yesterday, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, was compelling when she spoke about the challenges of tackling anonymous abuse and understanding that the public are looking to us to make changes here. Will my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss my verification campaign with a group, Clean Up the Internet, to see how your department can also assist this work?
Mr. Speaker, I'll certainly meet with my honourable friend and recognise that she's done a lot of work in this area. I do want to make very clear to people that where they are engaged in illegal abuse, they can be identified and they can be prosecuted via existing legislation, Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 84 and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016. But I do accept there are more aspects of this, and I would be very happy to meet with her and look forward to hearing her thoughts.
Yeah. We now go to topicals. Kate Osborne.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole country is horrified and shaken by the dreadful killing of our colleague and friend Sir David Amess. There's been a tidal wave of stories about David's kindness and compassions from all quarters. And to me, he was a dear and loyal friend. We are all utterly devastated for David's wife Julia and their family and loved ones. David, Mr. Speaker, as we've already heard across the House, had a huge number of friends in this House, in his constituency, in the county of Essex and well beyond. The causes he supported, we've heard, were diverse and so many, both relating to people and, of course, much-loved animals. And many sessions in this House were enlivened, Mr. Speaker, by his calls for city status for Southend. It is agonising to know that we will not see his wonderful smile again. And it took no effort on David's part to conduct the business of politics in a civilised, good-humoured way which came naturally to him. Decency ran through him like the writing in a stick of Southend rock. David represented all that was good about this place, so let us all carry his light forward and reflect his passionate commitment to making things better for the people we serve.
Kate Osborne.
Can I pay my respects to Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire and send my best wishes to his family, his friends and his staff.
Mr Speaker, today on Anti-Slavery Day, statistics obtained by After Exploitation show that since 2016, over 4,500 suspected trafficking victims have only been referred for support after leaving immigration detention. This shows a major failing and demonstrates how the trauma of detention prevents victims from disclosing their exploitation. So can the Minister explain what work is being carried out to tackle this problem, and also say why is the Home Office still planning to open a new immigration detention centre for women this month in County Durham?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, first of all, on the really important point that she has made around modern-day slavery and trafficking, the government is absolutely committed to undertaking every steps and every measures to provide support through the national referral mechanism, and also support in terms of victimisation through much of the modern-day slavery work that we do as well. I should just like to reassure the Honourable Lady, Mr Speaker, that actually through the current Borders and Nationality Bill, there is greater work taking place now in terms of what kind of measures we can put in place to safeguard the victims, safeguard their testimony, and make sure that they get the support that they need.
Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I place on record my own condolences to the families of the two colleagues that we have lost. I recently undertook resident surveys in Heath and Shirebrook in my constituency, and it showed that there was strong demand for more bobbies on the beat to tackle antisocial behaviour. Can I ask my honourable friend what progress we have made in getting more police on the streets in Derbyshire?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I commend the honourable gentleman for engaging with his constituents on what is very often easily the most important subject close to all of our constituents' hearts. He will be pleased to hear that we are now approaching the halfway mark on our 20,000 extra police officers, which obviously represents a gross recruitment of something over 20,000, and I hope that he will feel the effect of the now well over 100 police officers recruited by Derbyshire Constabulary on the streets of his constituency in the weeks to come.
Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I first met Sir David Amess when I entered this House in 2015, and when as a new member he approached me to ask how I was and how I was settling in. And that conversation captured the essence of Sir David, who was a kind, thoughtful and generous man, always cheerful and smiling. He was dedicated to the service of his constituents, he had passionate beliefs, and he worked across party lines on causes that mattered to him and those he served. He was respected and held in affection across the House, and we on these benches send condolences to his wife Julia, to all his loved ones and parliamentary colleagues. Sadly, Mr Speaker, another member of this House, James Brokenshire, was taken from us too young. I worked with James on a number of security issues. He was a man of firm beliefs, staunch integrity and unfailing good humour. He pursued causes with passion and respect and represented politics at its best. And we on these benches send sympathies to his wife Cathy and all his loved ones and parliamentary colleagues. I'd also, Mr Speaker, like to send best wishes to Lynn Owens to thank her for her work as Director General of the National Crime Agency and wish her a swift recovery from her recent surgery. Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to your office and to the Home Secretary for the work on MP security since the heinous crime that was committed on Friday. But I wonder if the Home Secretary could offer some further details on the review. Can she confirm when the review she announced will be completed, and what she will do too to ensure that any recommendations are applied consistently by police forces up and down the country?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, first of all, for his comments regarding Sir David, James and Lynn as well, Lynn Owens. These are important points, obviously, in terms of members' security, which the Speaker and myself have been working on over recent days. And it is absolutely right, I think, for all members of the House to recognise that we want to see consistency across the board when it comes to the safety and security of members of Parliament and our ability to conduct our public duties as democratically elected members of this House. The review is underway right now, and I can confirm to my right honourable friend and to all honourable and right honourable members that the policing review itself is concluding literally over the next few days. There will be more communications to all colleagues across the House in terms of how to conduct their work publicly in a safe and secure way, while at the same time giving the public the confidence and assurance that they need when they are coming to meet members in forums such as surgeries, but also that the one-to-one contact that members of Parliament require will be taking place actually starting from this afternoon.
Nick Thomason.
I'm grateful for that answer, and the awful murder of Sir David follows after the dreadful murder of our friend Joe Cox, an attack on my right honourable friend the member for East Ham, a plot to kill my honourable friend the member for West Lancashire, and the murder of Andrew Pennington, who was killed after an attack at the office of the now noble Lord Jones of Cheltenham. Now, any attack on any elected representative is an attack on our whole democracy, and it's with that imperative we have to approach this. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the current investigation is at a very early stage, and the Home Secretary will quite rightly be very guarded on specifics, but I wonder if she could comment more broadly on the issue of lone attackers. Can the Home Secretary set out what steps the government intends to take to investigate this type of attack, the radicalisation of perpetrators, and will a strategy be put in place to reduce the risk of such attacks in future?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of a live investigation taking place, and I will not be joining to any commentary whatsoever, and no member should. The issue of lone attackers is not new, and across society and across our country and other countries around the world, sadly we have seen too many lone attackers in previous years as well. There is a great deal of work taking place, and sadly we will continue to discuss actually the work across intelligence, policing, security, prisons and probation as well, the work that takes place to prevent these attacks, but also the data and intelligence sharing that is undertaken across our systems, across government, but across all aspects of various institutions and society, linked to, of course, some of the current inquiries that are also taking place. So there's a great deal of work that is in flight right now, underway. But I also think it is important to recognise, and I would like all members of the House to hear this, we have some of the best intelligence and security agencies in the world. I want to pay tribute to them today and our police forces for the work that they have been doing, specifically in regards to the current investigation, but also the much wider work that they do to keep us safe every single day.
Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to associate myself with the remarks made by yourself, the Home Secretary and other honourable members, and pay tribute to Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire, two fantastic and honourable MPs, cruelly taken before their time, and their friends and families are in all our thoughts and prayers. Now, on the review of security of MPs, does my right honourable friend agree with me that one of the things that makes our democracy great is the unfettered access our constituents have to us, and that this must be protected and strengthened as part of this review?
I thank the honourable friend for his question, well, for his comments and his question. He's absolutely right, and I think all of us, all honourable and right honourable members, take pride in their constituency work, and exactly that, the ability for constituents to approach us and for us to be approachable to them. Underway right now, there are a number of security reviews, but practical considerations that we are looking at, rightly to protect members and to protect the public, to enable us to carry out our functions as democratically elected members of this House.
SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having expressed our condolences, can we also express our thanks both to you and the Home Secretary for the work that's already ongoing to review and improve our security. I agree with the Home Secretary that we must make it our mission both to improve safety and to protect the close links between the public and their representatives. But will she agree that this must be true at all levels of democracy? And I mention in particular our local councillors at the coalface, often doing surgeries alone, week in and week out.
Right, my friend is absolutely right, and I would just like to pay tribute actually to all elected representatives across the United Kingdom, because they do conduct themselves day in, day out with great determination, and it is right, and there is work taking place, just to give the honourable gentleman in the House assurance through the Cabinet Office that we actually look at the right kind of measures in supporting.
Slow. I want to echo every comment that has been made about David Amess and James Brokenshire. The introduction of damping in 2004 to the police funding formula has cost Bedfordshire about 95 officers on the beat. Will the government commit to scrap damping as quickly as possible to be fair to Bedfordshire and the other forces affected, and to do so as quickly as possible?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've made a commitment in this House before that we'll introduce a new funding formula for police forces across the land before the next election. That is the objective that we're currently working towards, although I would warn everybody that all cannot have prizes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents and myself, I'd like to pass on my deepest condolences to the family of Sir David Amess and James Brokenshire. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State will no doubt be aware of the long-running extradition cases of the West Midlands Three, two of whom are my constituents in Coventry North West. These three people are British citizens and they have endured raids, arrest and imminent threats of extradition. Given that the Crown's lawyers could present no case whatsoever at the extradition proceedings and the threats of extradition has subsequently been dropped, will the Secretary of State outline exactly what evidence was used to justify these arrests in the first place? And I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree that my constituents deserve clear answers.
Speaker, I'd like to speak to the Honourable Lady separately on this case, if I may, because I didn't fully hear her question, but I will certainly follow up on this extradition.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you. Can I also extend my condolences to the family and friends of James and Sir David. Over the recess, the Pandora Papers showed that corrupt and criminal money is still making its way into the UK, and yet no unexplained wealth orders have been issued for the last 2 years. Could the Minister ensure that the National Crime Agency has the resources to pursue those orders in any case where they're appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And unexplained wealth orders are a very important tool, and yes, we are absolutely making sure the resources are there to support their use.
Hang on a bit. Neil Hanby. Not here. Let's go to Kate Olsen-Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to extend my condolences to Sir David and to James Brockenshire's family and friends. Is the Secretary of State aware that victims of the Windrush scandal are disproportionately likely to be suffering extreme hardship? Will she publish guidance on its expedition process for claims under the scheme so that those in acute need, such as my constituent, Anthony Bryan, can apply for the expedition?
The lady will be well aware of the extensive work that has taken place around the Windrush compensation scheme and the support that we've offered her constituents as well. If she'd like to meet with me to discuss this further, she'd be very welcome to.
Karen Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, and I refer to my entry in the Register of Members' Interest. Today, Mr. Speaker, we mark Anti-Slavery Day. One of the first people in government to recognise the importance of this issue was our much-missed colleague, James Brokenshire. Will my right honourable friend please confirm that her priority will be to continue James's work, making this a priority for her and making the UK a world leader in this area?
This honourable friend is absolutely right in the way, in passionate way, she's put her question forward. And we will continue that work and the legacy of the work that's taken place on modern-day slavery.
No word from the Prime Minister. Order. In a moment, I will ask the Prime Minister to move a motion for the adjournment of the House, which will give an opportunity for us to pay tribute to Sir David Amess. As I said earlier, the issues raised by the circumstances of Sir David's death will be looked at urgently and with the utmost priority. I would also remind honourable and right honourable members that a police investigation is ongoing. So our focus this afternoon should be on Sir David's life and his contribution to our democracy. In nearly 4 decades in this House, Sir David was second to none in his determined commitment to his constituents, firstly as the member for Basildon between 1983 and 97, and since then as the member for Southend West. He was tireless in making sure the voice of Southend West was heard in this chamber. It's difficult to believe that we will not hear him make the case for Southend achieving city status. Before the next recess, definitely. He worked equally hard outside of the chamber for his constituents, always going the extra mile to make sure their case was heard and their needs were met. He used his skills as a parliamentarian to pilot numerous pieces of legislation onto the statute books, reflecting his political priorities such as fuel poverty and, of course, animal welfare. He was much more admired as a member of the panel of chairs, respected across this House for his fairness and expertise. I would also like to thank the speakers from around the world who have sent messages of support, including Speaker Pelosi and Speaker Smith of Australia, along with many, many more who wanted to let us know that Congress and the Australian Parliament are thinking of us, David's family, and all at this time. On a personal level, David was a lovely man. He was well liked by members and staff alike, and during his almost 4 decades here, built a reputation for kindness, generosity, sustained by his faith. David was a devoted to his family. As much as we will miss a much-loved fellow parliamentarian, the loss felt by David's wife Julia and their children is unimaginable. I know the whole House will want to join me in sending them our deepest condolences. I now call the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn. The passing of 72 hours has done little to numb the shock and sadness we all felt when we heard of the tragic and senseless death of Sir David Amess. This House has lost a steadfast servant, we've lost a dear friend and colleague, and Julia and her children have lost a loving husband and devoted father. Nothing I or anyone else can say will lessen the pain, the grief, the anger they must feel at this darkest of times. We hold them in our hearts today. We mourn with them and we grieve alongside them. Sir David was taken from us in a contemptible act of violence, striking at the core of what it is to be a member of this House and violating the sanctity both of the church in which he was killed and the constituency surgery that is so essential to our representative democracy. But we will not allow the manner of Sir David's death in any way to detract from his accomplishments as a politician or as a human being. Because Sir David was a patriot who believed passionately in this country, in its people, in its future. He was also one of the nicest, kindest, and most gentle individuals ever to grace these benches. A man who used his decades of experience to offer friendship and support to new members of all parties, whose views often confounded expectation and defied easy stereotype, and who believed not just in pointing out what was wrong with society, but in getting on and doing something about it. It was that determination to make this country a better place that inspired his outstanding record on behalf of the vulnerable and the voiceless. The master of the Private Members Bill and 10-Minute Rule Bill, he passed legislation on subjects as diverse as animal welfare, fuel poverty, and the registration of driving instructors. He was a prodigious campaigner for children with learning disabilities and for women with endometriosis, a condition on which he became an expert after meeting a woman at one of his constituency surgeries. Behind the famous and irresistible beam lay a seasoned campaigner of verve and grit, whether he was demanding freedom for the people of Iran or courting votes in the Westminster Dog of the Year contest. Whether he was battling for Brexit or fighting his way to the front of the parliamentary pancake race. And as every member of this House will know, as you have just confirmed, Mr. Speaker, he never once witnessed any achievement by any resident of Southend that could not somehow be cited in his bid to secure city status for that distinguished town. Highlights of that bulging folder included a world record for playing the most triangles at once, a group of stilt walkers travelling non-stop from the Essex coast to Downing Street, and a visiting foreign dignitary allegedly flouting protocol by saying he liked Southend more than Cleethorpes, Mr. Speaker. A compelling case, Mr. Speaker. And as it is only a short time since Sir David last put that very case to me in this chamber, I am happy to announce that Her Majesty has agreed that Southend will be accorded the city status it so clearly deserves. That Sir David spent almost 40 years in this house, but not one day in ministerial office, tells everything about where his priorities lay. He was not a man in awe of this chamber, nor a man who sought patronage or advancement. He simply wanted to serve the people of Essex, first in Basildon, then in Southend. And it was in the act of serving his constituents that he was so cruelly killed. In his recent memoir, Sir David called surgeries a part of the great British tradition of the people openly meeting their elected politicians. Even after the murder of Joe Cox and the savage attacks on Stephen Timms and Nigel Jones, he refused to accept that he should be in any way deterred from speaking face to face with his constituents. And so when he died, he was doing what he firmly believed was the most important part of any MP's job, offering help to those in need. In the awful moments before we knew the full horror of the tragedy, a member of Sir David's Constituency Association, her voice breaking with emotion, told an interviewer that we need him, the country needs him, and we do. This country needs people like Sir David. This House needs people like Sir David, and our politics needs people like Sir David. Dedicated, passionate, firm in his beliefs, but never anything less than respectful for those who thought differently. Those are the values he brought to a lifetime of public service. There can be few among us more justified than him in his deep faith in the resurrection and the life to come. And while his death leaves a vacuum that will not and can never be filled, we will cherish his memory, we will celebrate his legacy, and we will never allow those who commit acts of evil to triumph over the democracy and the Parliament that Sir David Amess loved so much.
The question is this House to now adjourn. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few days, there have been many tributes to Sir David, from politicians of all parties, from his constituents and members of the public, from friends and from family, and from faith leaders, especially the Catholic Church, of which he was such a devoted follower. Each tribute paints its own picture of a committed public servant, of kindness, and of a man whose decency touched everybody that he met. Taken together, these tributes are a powerful testimony to the respect, the affection, and yes, the love that David was held in across politics and across different communities. Together they speak volumes about the man that he was and the loss that we grieve. Sir David was a dedicated parliamentarian, and his loss is felt profoundly across this House. We are united in our grief at this terrible time. We are thinking of David and his family. We are thinking, once again, of our dear friend Joe Cox, who was killed just 5 short years ago. And I know that honourable members and their staff will have spent the weekend worrying about their own safety. The emotion is the same across the House. But I remember just how acutely Joe's loss was felt on these benches. So today, on behalf of the entire Labour Party, I want to lean across, to reach across, and to acknowledge the pain that's felt on the opposite benches, and I do. Of course our differences matter. After all, that's what democracy is about. But today we're reminded that what we have in common matters far more. I spoke to Joe Cox's parents on Friday afternoon because I knew that they would be reliving that terrible day. They said to me they were thinking of David's family and how their lives would be changed forever. So today, just as the Prime Minister has said, this House holds in our hearts David's wife, Julia, his children, Catherine, David Jr., Sarah, Florence, and Alex, and all of those who loved him. We cannot begin to imagine what they're going through, but our thoughts, our love, and our prayers are with them. I also thank those who did everything they could to save David's life and our emergency services, who run towards danger to protect us. And I just want to take a moment to think about, for all of us to think about, David's staff and what they must be going through. This Parliament that David loved so much has lost one of its finest advocates. His colleagues have lost a dear friend, and the people of Southend have lost one of their own. Sir David was a dedicated constituency MP. When I visited Southend on Saturday, I was struck by the affection and the regard that he was held in by everybody I met. He rejected ministerial office to focus on Southend, and we remember his historic battle to see it given city status. And I'm so pleased at the announcement the Prime Minister has just made. It is a fitting tribute to Sir David's hard work, it really is. Fitting because David delivered on the causes he championed. He cared about them. He passed a bill that forced action on fuel poverty. He paved the way for better standards of fire safety and delivered protections for animal welfare. And no tribute has emerged in recent days that resonates more vividly than that of his former parliamentary staffer, Edward Holmes. As he was in his first job out of university, Holmes forgot to tell Sir David about an urgent call that the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, had made. He said he felt terrified until he finally plucked up the courage to tell David, whose response was typical. "Don't worry about that, Edward." So relaxed was David that Mr. Holmes says he suspects he never actually called the Prime Minister back. That tells of a politician who had his priorities right. One who put his people before his party and his patch before his personal advancement. Even as a political opponent, he was a man and a politician we can all learn so much from. I use that phrase, political opponent, very deliberately, because David held his beliefs passionately, but gently. And I believe that not only can we learn from that, but we have a duty to learn from that. Civility matters, and it matters in politics. We must not lose sight of the fact that David's killing was an act of terror in our country. We can't help today but think of Joe Cox, Andrew Pennington, and PC Keith Palmer, who lost his life defending all of us in this place in 2017. And we thank God that the Honourable Member for East Ham is with us in the Chamber today, and that the Honourable Member for West Lancashire's would-be attackers were stopped in their tracks. And I know that politicians across the country, across this House, have their own experiences of threats to their security. Today is a chance to remember David. But in the weeks and days to come, we must confront the threats and violence that everyone faces in acting this country's democracy. It's too early for us to comment on the exact motivations and circumstances of David's killing. But I do want to finish by saying this. A cowardly attack on a public servant doing his job is an attack on our country and on our way of life. A way of life that prizes tolerance, democracy and respect, that accepts our differences but cherishes our commonalities, that refuses to succumb to the poison of extremism. No matter what perverted cause, faith or ideology these attackers support, their intention is always the same: to sow division amongst us. And that's why our response must always be to show that we will never be cowed, that our bonds to one another can never be eroded, that the hatred that took Sir David's life will never win. Our democracy is precious. It's held firm against many tests, but it's also a fragile, living thing. Let us use the memory of Sir David's life and his passions to nourish it, to recommit ourselves in standing for the things that he stood for, the things that extremists will never comprehend, for decency in our disagreements, for kindness in our hearts, for our great democracy, and for the hope that through it we can make our country and our world a better place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir David Amess was my best and oldest friend in politics. So I confess that I'm hurting terribly. And I hope the House will therefore forgive me if, because of that, my contribution this afternoon is even more incoherent than usual. I certainly cannot match those two beautiful and, if I may so, extremely moving tributes from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. Thank you. Everything I ever learned about how to be a constituency MP, I learned from David Amess. He sponsored me for the candidates list and he mentored me when I arrived. Without him, I would never have become a member of Parliament. So some might well argue he has much to answer for. I grew up in Basildon when David was the local MP. I grew up on a working-class council estate, which even the locals nicknamed Alcatraz. David helped me to campaign in 1991 to win election onto Basildon Council. Quite a robust place to learn your trade. Once described as the only local authority in Britain where at council meetings the councillors actively heckled the public gallery. I was there. Trust me, I'm a politician. In return, I ran his ground war in his iconic defence of Basildon in 1992. During that campaign, Mr. Speaker, the late Paul Channon came down from Southend to help, and we were out canvassing on a council estate in Pitsea. I'll never forget it. We knocked on this door, and this monster of a bloke opened the door, and he looked at us both, and he looked at the blue rosettes, and he said, "Conservative? Tory? You must be bloody joking, mate. I'm voting for that David Amess." And I said, "I know when I'm beat, sir. Well done." And my partner Olivia and I were due to be on his table at the Southend West Conservatives annual dinner on the day that he was killed. But David is now our fallen comrade, sir. He was a devoted and a loving family man, and our deepest sympathies are with his widow, Lady Julia, and his 5 children,
who produced the most amazingly courageous statement yesterday, the essence of which I think was that love must conquer hate. And I'm sure, sir, we all agree with that. He was an animal lover, a patriot, a Thatcherite, a Eurosceptic, a monarchist, and a staunch Roman Catholic, whose faith sustained him throughout his life. And he was a truly great friend in need. I can vouch for that. And a fine parliamentarian. He was probably the best potential father of the House we will now never have. He had a zest for life. He had a joie de vivre. For him, the glass was never half empty. It was 3/4 full. He was a doughty champion for Basildon and then for Southend. So thank you, Prime Minister and Her Majesty and the Privy Council for making Southend a city after all. It was the right thing to do. And our apologies to Cleethorpes. While you're at it, if you can help Southend United, they're having a bit of a patch. They really need, sir, all the help they can get. But you never knew what David was going to do next. That Essex cheeky chappy smile, that impish Amos grin, always with some hint of gentle mischief standing behind it. He once even persuaded His Holiness the Pope to bless a boiled sweet. But my friend and neighbour will explain in a moment, Mr. Speaker. But he did have a serious side too, and it's on that which I really want to focus the rest of my contribution today. In the last few years, David had become increasingly concerned about what he called the toxic environment in which MPs, particularly female MPs, were having to operate. He was appalled by what he called the vile misogynistic abuse which female MPs had to endure online, and he told me very recently that he wanted something done about it. 3 years ago, 3 years, my right honourable friend for Mid-Bedfordshire wrote a powerful article about this on Conservative Home, in which he quoted the following social media post. I want to see you trapped in a burning car and watch the heat from the flames as they melt the flesh from your face. I ask you, Mr. Speaker, what did she do to ever deserve that? Another fallen comrade, Jo Cox, whose sister now graces this place, said we have more in common than divides us. And I think she was absolutely right. Mr. Speaker, all of us, wherever we come from, came here to try and help people. We may disagree, sometimes passionately, about how best to help people, but surely we can all agree that we came here to try, for which we are now systematically vilified, day after day. And I simply say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that enough is enough. Because we all have absolutely one thing in common. We are legislators. So I humbly suggest, Mr. Speaker, we get on and do some legislating. I suggest that if we want to ensure that our colleague didn't die in vain, we collectively, all of us, pick up the baton, regardless of our party, and take the forthcoming online harms bill and toughen it up markedly. So let's put, if I may be so presumptuous, David's law onto the statute book, the essence of which would be that while people in public life must remain open to legitimate criticism, they can no longer be vilified or their families subject to the most horrendous abuse, especially from people who hide behind a cloak of anonymity, with the connivance of the social media companies for profit. The mood I'm in, Mr. Speaker, I confess I'd like to drag Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Jack Dorsey of Twitter to the bar of the House, if necessary kicking and screaming, so they can look us all in the eye and account for their actions, or rather their inactions, which make them even richer than they already are. And let's do that for all of our councillors, who are sick and tired of reading on Facebook after every planning committee the night before that, well, it must have been a brown envelope job. Let's do it for all those other people who hold surgeries, for GPs, who have carried on tending to the sick throughout the pandemic, but who are now being vilified online along with their loyal receptionists and staff just for trying to do their job. And if the social media companies don't want to help us drain the Twitter swamp, then let's compel them to do it by law, because they've had more than enough chances to do it voluntarily. So please bring in this bill, Prime Minister. And if you need any assistance in toughening it up, we're called the backbenchers of the House of Commons, and we're here to help. What better way to ensure that a fine parliamentarian did not die in vain than to enshrine one of his last wishes in legislation forever, for the benefit of all of those in public life? There were many who wished to pay tributes, Mr. Speaker, so I'll end with this. Another thing about David was his legendary timekeeping, or rather the lack of it. He was so popular that his constituency events always ran late. There were so many people who always wanted to speak to him. So by the end of a busy constituency Friday, of which he had many, he was sometimes running up to an hour late. He invariably overran. And so in his honour this afternoon, so I'm afraid have I. Sorry. But because of this wonderful trait, what better fault to have than that? Among some of his closest friends, he was known affectionately as the late Sir David Amess. Well, now he really is the late Sir David Amess, isn't he? But I am absolutely determined, and I ask for your support in this, that he will not have died in vain. He's now resting in the arms of the God he worshipped so devotedly his whole life. So farewell, David, my colleague, my great friend. In fact, quite simply, the best bloke I ever knew. I thank the House for its indulgence.
I now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a considerable pleasure to follow the honourable member for Rayleigh and Whitford, and I have to say, and I don't think I've ever said this after any of his contributions, I pretty well agree with every single word he said, and I hope the House does listen very carefully to what he said and the responsibilities that we all have. Mr. Speaker, we are gathered here united in mourning and grief at the loss of a proud champion of Southend, of now to be the city of Southend, a great backbencher, a beloved husband, and a father and dear friend to so many, particularly on the government benches. Sir David Amess was valued in so many ways, but I think the most powerful description he achieved was in some ways was the simplest and the most human. David was above all else a good and a deeply decent man. A man that would always greet you with a welcoming smile whenever you met him. For members and staff across this House, it will take time to come to terms with the terrible shock of the senseless loss of another colleague. Because just as our thoughts and prayers today are with the entire Amess family, we think too of the family of Joe Cox, who are forced to relive the nightmare of their experience all over again. Mr. Speaker, members of this House are being murdered while simply doing their job. That is the terrible reality that we are faced with. And just as we face it together, we need to put an end to it together. In providing that security and safety, we need to protect all those at risk. Because we all know that it's often our staff who are at the very front line of the threats and the abuse as well. So I welcome the review underway into MP security, but I would genuinely urge the Home Secretary to also include our staff is a central part of that security review.
Hear, hear.
The devastating loss of Sir David has once again laid bare that twin threat of terrorism and the toxic culture of hate and intolerance that has become all too common. So today, of all days, it is crucial that we show the same spirit and speak with one voice across this House, as indeed we are doing. I stand firmly with and echo the powerful and poignant words of both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. But I also want to commend them for jointly going and standing together in Southend on Saturday. That was exactly the right image and the right message to send. People need to see that image of unity on Saturday, and it is an image and ethos of political leadership that we need to project in public far more often. A healthy democracy that engages with passionate disagreement as appropriate. But we all know that somewhere along the way we have been badly diverted. For too long we have been dragged down a path where passionate disagreement has been infected by poison. All of us can do better not to feed into that corrosive culture. All of us have been a victim of it, and every single one of us have a responsibility to put an end to it. It is the truest tribute to Sir David that he personified exactly what we need to get to. He was a person whose politics could be forceful, but always a friendly, a person who could disagree without ever, not ever, being disagreeable. For the rest of this session, I look forward to hearing the fond memories from many of his colleagues and friends. The beautiful statement released by the Amess family last night put it better than I possibly could. David's lesson and his legacy is to show kindness and love to all. All of our memories will be of a good man and of a life well lived. May his family and community today know that the true depth of respect, affection and love that he enjoyed across this House. And may his gentle soul now rest in peace. God bless you, David.
James Duttridge.
David was a man of faith and convictions. Faith in his religion and convictions in his politics. He was, above and beyond everything else, a family man and a very funny man. He'd often break all the rules, cutting through pomp and ceremony and connecting with people. When introducing me, he'd always make up a story. I was the Strictly Come Dancing winner at his annual party for people over the age of 100. Before there was ever a raffle, he'd describe me as a lottery millionaire at a charity fundraiser. My favourite icebreaker is meet James. He's my neighbour. He's recently got out of prison. He'd hold the audience with his anecdotes and stories, and I would like to share the story of the boiled sweet. David was a regular visitor to the Vatican, given his faith, and in the receiving line, perhaps slightly absent-mindedly, being used to these things, people were getting items blessed. David, having a sore throat, reached into his pocket for a boiled sweet. David got his timing wrong. The Pope took the sweet, thinking it was a revered object to be blessed. Blessed the revered object. And David had to put it in his pocket. A holy sweet. And when David would tell the anecdote, as he would do many a time, I suspect you've all heard it, he'd again reach into his pocket and say, "And this is the sweet that was blessed." Mr. Speaker, I suspect there have been many sweets passed off as the holy sweet, but there is only one chosen one. As the neighbouring Member of Parliament for what we now must say is Southend City, and thank you, Prime Minister. It means a lot to everybody, it really does. People would sidle up to me, colleagues would sidle up to me and say, "You're David's neighbour, aren't you?" And I'm like, a bit tentative, yes. But I knew what was coming. It was always an outrageous story of his behaviour at a meeting, or particularly on overseas trips, that just completely broke the ice. He was indeed a great man. He loved animals, but there will no longer be the infamous Dog of the Day tweets. He would never again dress as a knight in full battle finery, mount a horse and ride across the city of Southend as he did after receiving a knighthood. This really is unbelievable. I'm making it up. Mr. Speaker, seriously, thank you for coming on Saturday. To have the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, yourself there, sent a real message to the town, the city, that the nation cared and the nation was mourning with us. The impact of David's death has been profound on the city. Southend are in shock and I'm in shock, and I'm told that the pathway going forward for the city will be difficult. Having spoken to people around Joe Cox's family, I know this is going to be a long process. We don't want to be the city where the MP was murdered. We want to be the city with the longest pleasure pier in the world, with a great airport, with a successful football team. even if David was conflicted on the latter matter as a confirmed man of the East End and a West Ham supporter. He loved his mum, who lived to 104. We all in Southend assumed David would go on forever. The late Eric Forth told me that David would be the father of the house. I just thought it was going to be thus one day, but it was not so. In gathering my words, I thought of the phrase, cut short in his prime, and then smirked to myself, given they were somewhat ridiculous, age 69. But he was sprightly. He was a secret gym goer, a head full of floppy hair. I just felt that there was more ahead of him than behind him. Sadly, his future was stolen from us all, and Southend and this house are poorer for it. Over the weekend, I kept watching the news, hoping that the ending of the story or news clip would be somehow different to the previous ending. At a vigil in Southend, there were hundreds of people from all walks of life. Every story was very different, but at the same time, every story was the same. David listened, David cared, David delivered. He had a knack of getting things done, and as been said, I always expected him to turn up late, so I wasn't surprised when he wasn't at the beginning of the vigil. But I really did expect him to be there, because he's always there. It's unbelievable he's not coming back. And you think of the last meeting you had with him. I think of the last Remembrance Day service, the last Christmas with him dressing up as Santa Claus, going out and giving chocolates to the kids in Neptune Ward in Southend, whether they wanted them or not. Bringing the remainder to my kids, who would stick them to one side, and despite all rules about eating chocolate. But this is not the last of David. He lives on in us all. I don't think David would have seen himself as a mentor to people in this house. He wouldn't have called himself that, but that's what he was by demonstration and osmosis. David inspired great loyalty into his staff. His office was always packed with people, paperwork, and as anyone who's been there would know, fish and birds, despite the House authorities' ban on the subject. Part office, part museum of decades of political memorabilia, part pet shop. It was an office, like the politician, unique. He's survived by a lovely family, Julia, his wife, his children, David Jr., Catherine, Sarah, Alex and Florence. And it's with sadness that the family comes from all corners to be back together in the city of Southend. We pray for you collectively. Their statement yesterday was poignant. They said, we ask people to set aside their differences and show kindness and love to all. That should not be beyond us all. It is not a bad instruction to this House. Let's take that message back to our constituencies. Let's make some good of this horror. And to Julia, Southend thanks your husband for his service. Rest in peace, my good friend. Rest in peace.
Can I just say, just to reassure the House, the animals are being looked after. His office is being looked after. I would just urge members now to think of others as we try and get through a very long list. I now come to the Mother of the House, Harriet Hall.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Beyond the horror we all feel, Sir David's family is first and foremost in my thoughts. and I want to add my heartfelt sympathy to his wife and to his children. Their statement this morning, in their unimaginable shock and grief, shows such extraordinary dignity. Sir David was one of the most dedicated, but also the most affable of MPs. He looked beyond party differences to work with so many of us on a multitude of issues of common concern, and that's why there are tears on all sides of the House this afternoon. Most recently, just one example, he took the lead on a cause which I then took up, which was the injustice done to young unmarried mothers whose babies were taken from them in the 1960s and 70s. We've all got examples where he's worked with us. My tribute to him will be to redouble my efforts on that and to remember and to work in the spirit that he exemplified. Commitment to constituency, commitment to Parliament, a belief that he could and did make a difference. Sir David Amess, rest in peace.
We now come to the Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottom.
I agree with Harriet and Ian. David Amess, in 2010, made a speech where he said it's extraordinary listening to the acting leader of the Labour Party, now the Mother of the House. He said she made a splendid speech. One of the jokes was fantastic. He's going to use it in the future. David's fire safety all-party group worked with the all-party leasehold and commonhold reform group. We had a number of meetings over the year, and as well as the city, can I put it to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that they could make his legacy on defective leasehold flats the finding, the fixing and the funding of the problems while chasing those responsible to pay up. I think he'd wish that. If we look around this chamber, we see the shields of those who've died, some in active service in the last World War. Ronald Cartland was the first. Other members went forward knowing the risks. So did Police Constable Keith Palmer. Jo Cox and her family are in our hearts, as we've been told, and we remember Andrew Pennington, the Liberal MP's caseworker, who also died in a constituency attack. A few of us were here when Erin Neve's car was blown up. Robert Bradford and I were together in the Westminster Wobblers, the House of Commons football team. Tony Berry was my whip, and Ian Gow and I canvassed together in Ulster. His death, I believe, was time to make people forget the murder of the Sister of Mercy, Catherine Dunn, a few days earlier in July 1990. In David's first speech in January 1984, he said, "Charity has been described as that amiable quality that moves us to condone in others the sins and vices which we ourselves are addicted to." He was able to say in his first speech that in the Commons, when he made it, there were 5 people who had previously represented his own constituency there with him, which I think must be some kind of a parliamentary record. He was followed by the right honourable member for Newcastle upon Tyne East, who cheerfully said, at the risk of dissent from those behind him on the Labour benches, I congratulate the honourable member for Basil and Mr Amess on his maiden speech. I do not agree with what he said, but it was no worse than the speech of the Minister. Which was a line that Douglas Jay used when he congratulated me in 1975. So it obviously must be in this sort of Labour Whip's booklet. He went on to wish the honourable member well in what time he had in Parliament. That time, I think, is well described by Trevor Phillips in the Times today, and his leading words were, the simplicity of a man who served, he knew his constituents well and showed them what the Tory party could be. Can we, Mr Speaker, thank you and the party leaders for what you've said over the last 3 days. And if I may say so, also add John Bercow, who in an interview I heard represented the feeling of those who have served with David in this House. Many of these attacks are done for calculated publicity and public reaction. We should try to make both act against the wishes of perpetrators. The only guarantee is that when there is a gap, it will be filled. MPs are in the middle of the pack of people at some risk. Ministers of religion, mental health workers, public transport staff, lone shopkeepers, women police officers, journalists, fair employment builders in Northern Ireland and the judiciary, and especially women and girls going home and at home. We should defend people in every walk of life, in politics and in universities, and here I mentioned mildly the philosopher Professor Kathleen Stock in my county of Sussex. St Margaret's Church, Parliament Square, where I serve as Parliamentary Warden, is where we will gather later today and for the Roman Catholic service on Wednesday. We've learnt to stand with the Irish and Northern Irish against violence. We stand with Muslims against Islamophobia, with Jews against anti-Semitism, and with all the targets of fascists and white supremacists. We do have to be vigilant, but we also have to continue to be diligent in contact with constituents. Of course, review obvious security risks, and I would argue the insecure location at the National Holocaust Memorial presently proposed at Victoria Tower Gardens. At the opening of the Imperial War Museum Holocaust Galleries last week, I collected posters. David might wish us to remember their words, as if directed to us and to our constituents. Freedom is at peril. Defend it with all your might. Another, which brings his face to my mind, your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory. And I end with the words from the Prime Minister's first speech to the House of Commons on the 13th of May 1940. Let us go forward together.
Ed David.
The grief, the sadness and the shock we're all feeling today on the awful loss of Sir David Amess. This collective sorrow unites us all today. And like the Leader of the Opposition, I want to reach across the aisle and say to every Conservative colleague who knew David much better than many of us on these benches, has been so evident in the brilliant speeches we've heard, we feel for you. David's wonderful friendliness and his eclectic mix of campaigns that bridged the political divide were very special. From his campaigns on animal welfare to his championing of the few poor, David always spoke with compassion, authority, and often humour. Since Friday, I've spoken to a range of people about David, not least Liberal Democrat councillors from Southend. I have to confess to colleagues opposite that not all Liberal Democrat councillors are always complimentary about their sitting Conservative MP. But about David Amess, their affection was totally authentic. Carol Mulroney, a councillor in Leigh-on-Sea, told me how appreciative she was of David's support for the Leigh Society and the local heritage centre it runs. Local history was clearly a passion of David's, as shown by his championing of the cause of the Endeavour, the only one of Leigh's little ships to have survived the years since Dunkirk. Endeavour has been brought back to Leigh and restored, and now takes part in Dunkirk ceremonies and local events, not least thanks to David. As well as being proud of Southend's past, David will always be deeply connected to its present and its future, not least now we will have the city of Southend. Carol told me how David would proudly boast of walking each road, each street, each drive, each avenue and each lane of his constituency, and how supportive he was of every community, not least the local fishing and cockling industry. Mr. Speaker, every community needs champions like David. The point is that we don't have to agree with each other across our political divides, but we can learn to be kind and warm even when we disagree. David was. Today is not the day for discussing the implications for MP security and so on, but I do want to reflect on what happened to one of my close colleagues from these benches nearly 21 years ago. Yesterday I spoke to Nigel Jones, a former MP for Cheltenham, who many will recall, and a number have mentioned, was brutally assaulted during constituency advice surgery. Nigel was saved that day by the bravery of his member of staff, Andrew Pennington. Andrew Pennington was killed. Andrew was a local councillor who Nigel told me used to work 7 days a week for local residents. and was Nigel's right-hand person. So as we reflect on the loss of David and on the threat to MPs, let us remember this too. Our staff and many in public services face abuse, threats and violence on an alarmingly frequent basis. It's incumbent on us in this House to defend them all. I'm sure that is what David would have wanted.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Laughter, service, compassion. These are three of the words that spring to my mind when I think of David Amess. Laughter, because you could never have a conversation with David without laughter and smiling. Whether it was because of one of the outrageous stories that he was telling, perhaps about one of his colleagues or somebody else. But there was always smiles, always laughter, always fun around David. Service, because he had an extraordinary record of dedicated service to his constituents. And I suggest to anybody who wants to be a first-class constituency MP that you look at the example of David Amess. He was deeply embedded in his constituency and, as we all know, championed it on every possible occasion. I don't think a question or speech from David went by in this House without his constituency being mentioned in it. But he didn't just promote his constituency here in the House. He was a part of it. He understood it. He knew it. He was in the community. He was of the community. And he was respected and loved by the community. His death is tragic, and the manner of his death appalling. But isn't it fitting that his last acts were acts of service to his constituents? And then there was David's compassion, born out of and strengthened by his faith. Compassion for the vulnerable, compassion for those in need. But he didn't just talk about it, he acted. He changed laws. He went out there and made a difference to people's lives. Because he was also an accomplished parliamentarian, and he knew that a backbencher who is dedicated and resolute can make a real difference. And to echo some of the comments that have been made today, first of all, I think it's a wonderful legacy for David that Southend is now a city. But we can also add to the legacy of David Amess by ensuring that in all our political debates, in our political discourse, we bring to those debates and that discourse the same respect, decency and compassion that were the symbols of his life. Because David Amess made a difference. His compassion made a difference to people outside of this House. His kindness made a difference to people inside this House. Our thoughts and prayers are with Julia and the family. Their loss is devastating. His constituency has lost a much respected and loved Member of Parliament. This House has lost a remarkable and valued parliamentarian. And every member of this House has lost a friend. May he rest in peace.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As been alluded to, Sir David was a man of deep Catholic faith. The Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 10, reminds us that the Lord came not just to give life, but to give it in abundance. And David lived his life in abundance, a joyous service both to his constituents and here in this House. We would see him late at night, often in a tuxedo, going from charitable concern to charitable concerns, championing the causes he believed in. He looked good in a tuxedo. No Daniel Craig, but this was no time to die either. My wife reminded me of the time where we went to the beatification in Rome of John Henry Newman just before lockdown. A beautiful service presided over by Pope Francis. We were whisked to the Oratorian College on one of the mountains of Rome overlooking Vatican City, where Prince Charles addressed us brilliantly. And then the royal cavalcade rushed out. Unfortunately, the parliamentarians on the trip were left stranded. The former member for Ealing North, Stephen Pound, the former naval commander, decided to lead the vanguard in a military operation to get us back down to our hotel. Like troglodytes, we entered this cave and ended up in this vast Franciscan monastery. Our party became separated. It was now more like an Ealing comedy under Stephen's leadership. My wife reminded me that I abandoned her and her safety to a lifelong Labour activist, my wife, to 3 Tory MPs getting stuck in a lift, including Basildon Man, she said, because he was still etched on our 1992 election memory. The other 2 MPs, by the way, were North Dorset and the Fylde Coast. So I will catch Mark and Simon up about what went on in that lift, because my wife said, what an utterly wonderful man. He participated fully in the liturgy of the church. He participated fully in the sacraments of the church. While I have the attention of the front benches, Catholics believe that extreme unction helps guide the soul to God after death. So maybe we could come up with an Amess amendment, no matter where it is, in the care home or at a crime scene, that members, anybody, maybe can receive that sacrament. He believed fundamentally in the social teaching of the church, dignity, solidarity, subsidiarity to the nth degree when it came to Southend, preferential option for the poor and the care for environment. That meant he came with unique views on things such as life, death, Europe, animal protection, sometimes in chime with his party, sometimes in chime with the country, but sometimes not. He channeled the 14th century mystic, the Julian of Norwich. She said, all things shall be well and all manner of things shall be well. That's difficult for us all here today. His cheeky catchphrase was, don't worry, it will be fine. Not quite Bruce Forsyth, but he was a friend of Bruce Forsyth's and his family. He did not die a martyr, but he died, as has been said, by doing the things he loved, helping constituents. He would have known, the theologian Carl Rayner would have said, that power was a gift from God. That portcullis on the top of our letterheads gives us all that power, whether on the front bench or whether in opposition or whether on the back benches. Let's recommit to Sir David today that we will use that power for the common good. He died on the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, and she said this famously: trust God that you are exactly where you are meant to be. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born of faith. Many of you use those gifts that you have received and pass on the love that has been given to you. David used those gifts and he passed on that love. So, Sir David, may the choirs of angels come to greet you. May they lead you to paradise. May the Lord enfold you in his mercy. May he grant you eternal life. Eternal rest give to him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace.
Amen. Andrew Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, it was a true privilege to have known David Amess. He was simply one of the best people I've ever known in my entire life. He was a true friend. He had time for each and every one of us. He looked down on no one. He was everyone's equal. He was kind. He was generous. He was sincere. He was a man of principle and courage. He was uncompromising in what he believed to be right. He wasn't one of these who changed his views in order to progress. He knew what he believed in, and he stood firm for those things. He was a man of enormous integrity, but he was a true friend to so many of us. I knew him for around 40 years. We became friends instantly because we shared the same political views, but we came from the same background. I am from Essex. Some say East London, but I say Essex. And he knew that our instincts coming from that neck of the woods were the same, and we hit it off from day one. We were committed to this country, we love our country. He was a passionate believer in Britain, a true patriot. He was a royalist. He was never afraid to fly the flag and to champion great British values. He was a Christian and was proud to be a Christian and uphold the Christian heritage of this country. He also loved animals, as I do. And he almost loved my dogs as much as I loved his dogs. And many occasions visiting his home in Southend, often taking my own elderly mother, and he had an elderly mother who lived till 104, and when his mum died, he spoke to my mother as if it was his mother. He treated me like family. And my heart goes out to Julia and the 5 children, who are wonderful people. He had a fantastic family, and he was so dedicated to his constituencies, Basildon and Southend West. He lived for them, and he did sacrifice everything else to put his constituency first. And I will say this, Mr. Speaker, the one legacy we must hold true to David is not to let his horrific murder, the horrific way that he left us, to change our democracy. I remember the day after the appalling Grand Hotel bombing in Brighton in 1984, and I remember Margaret Thatcher, and he was a dedicated supporter of Margaret Thatcher. I remember her saying, "It's business as usual. We must carry on." And I take the same view. Whatever happens, whatever we do to carry on and protect ourselves, we must not let our democracy be undermined by that kind of evil. Yeah. We must stand up to evil, defend our democracy, cherish the freedom that gives all of us the right to be here and represent our constituents, and defend and cherish the freedoms and the liberties that have held our country together for generations. David was a fine example of a parliamentarian, a magnificent constituency MP, a true friend, a gentleman, a truly wonderful human being. We're going to miss him, but I feel truly privileged to have known him. Thank you, David. God bless you.
Yeah. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my right honourable and honourable friends, I rise to record the common and unified voice of the people of Northern Ireland, who share in the grief and sorrow at the loss of our esteemed and much loved colleague and friend, and my condolences and sympathy to you, Prime Minister, and to your colleagues on the Conservative benches. Words cannot adequately describe nor suitably express our heartfelt sympathy. But through the words that have been spoken here today and across our nation in recent days, I pray that they sustain and give strength to David's family. No one will feel the loss of David more than his family. To his wife Julia, his beloved children, and to the wider family circle, on behalf of my party, I offer my heartfelt condolences and deepest sympathy, and trust and pray that Almighty God, the greatest of all comforters, will draw near to all of them. David epitomised the true meaning of public service. He was the model parliamentarian. He sought office not for self, but to serve others, influenced by his deep Christian faith. To champion the needs of the most vulnerable, to give a voice to the voiceless, and to stand up for the interests of the people of Southend West. David's greatest joy came not in holding office, but in how he could use that office to improve the everyday lives of those he was honoured to represent. The people of his constituency, and now to and from the city of Southend have lost their greatest champion. And I, Mr. Speaker, like members on all sides of this House, have lost a dear friend. The plaques at the entrance door to this chamber and around this chamber, in memory of the late Erie Neve, Robert Bradford, Anthony Berry, Ian Gow and Joe Cox, are a daily reminder to all of us of the threat our democracy faces in modern times. In Northern Ireland, all parties in this chamber have experienced these threats and the loss of dear colleagues at the hands of the enemies of democracy. Today, this House sends a clear message, a resounding message, that democracy in the United Kingdom will never be suppressed. Our voices will never fall silent, and we will never allow evil to triumph over good. David taught us all the true meaning of public service. He showed us the true value of public office and provided us all with a true example of faith in public life. His legacy lives on in all those causes and communities he championed, in the lives he improved, and in all those he inspired. Mr. Speaker, it now falls upon us all to take forward the beacon of hope along the path that David led us, and to ensure that the flame of his legacy is never extinguished. This House is the poorer for his loss, and this country, all of it, mourns the tragic passing of one of its most faithful servants. Our response collectively to this is simple. When one of us falls, another will step forward. Together we will continue to defend the values and ideals that David stood for, and that are the foundation stones of this great nation. Thank you.
We now come to Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the whole House will be left in no doubt of the genuine affection that Sir David's constituents held him just by watching the TV footage this weekend. And as a friend of his, I'm hugely comforted by the genuine affection that's been shown today and in response by honourable members. For me, David was a great friend as well as a great parliamentarian. Now, last week, Sir David led a delegation of the all-party group on a visit to Qatar, and he led that delegation with his characteristic good humour, dare I say, great fun, and inclusivity. And during the course of that visit, we had the benefit of an audience with His Highness the Emir. And as the meeting came to a close, David, with great flourish, referred to the need to present a gift. And with his characteristic self-deprecation, he said, "What could I give the man who has everything? Here's the inscribed copy of my book." and that was David. That was David. But I can say to you, for those of you who haven't yet read David's book, can I suggest you go out and get a copy, because the proceeds go to some of the charities that he championed. And could I also say that, in actual fact, if you read the book, it is the authentic voice of David, with his pen portraits, some of which are humorous, some of which are quite barbed. But it is actually a great insight into Parliament from somebody who, as we've heard today, spent much of his career all of his career on the backbenches. But he loved this place. He genuinely thought it was a privilege to be a member of Parliament. He loved his work on the panel of chairs. He was proud of the legislation that he'd secured. End of term adjournment debates. They will never ever be the same again, will they? And he may yet have become Father of the House. But what I'd leave to the serious point here is that in the 38 years he served as a Member of Parliament, one of the things he lamented was the decline in respect for this institution and for the members within it. And the reason he lamented it was because he felt our constituents were the poorer for it.
Because as that respect declined, and we just became inconveniences to be managed by public authorities rather than the genuine voice of challenge. And I think if we do anything to remember him, that is something he would wish us to collectively work to address, as that is what makes this place worthwhile. We must, in reflecting on his memory, not remember the way in which his life was taken, but remember how he lived. And his beaming face in 1992, when his victory marked a fourth election victory for the Conservatives, is of course iconic. But I should say to the House, his biggest pride was actually not that result, but the one in 1983, when he won Basildon for the first time. A victory which is against the odds as much as the one in 1992. And I would say that he held Basildon as a marginal seat for all that time because he was an amazing campaigner. He had time for everyone, as we've heard before. His megaphone was never too far away, and I have to say, we enjoyed some visits with David and his megaphone in Thurrock over the years, and always great fun. But as an East Ender, he instinctively represented the politics of South Essex. He would describe himself as a working class Conservative, and very much epitomised the kind of person who embraced the politics of Margaret Thatcher. And he would recount with great pride at the occasion when, after everyone had written his election prospects off in 1992, it was Margaret Thatcher who came on the eve of poll to support him, and he credited that with part of his victory. Our thoughts are obviously now with Sir David's family, and I just, on a final note, just say that the last time I went to David's house, he was proudly showing me his wedding video. And the reason he was doing so was not just to show me the Honourable Member for Derbyshire Dales and her dancing back in those days in 1983, and he was hugely proud that she got here too. But actually, the exact wedding that he had to Julia in 1983 with Westminster Cathedral and then a reception here was what he repeated for his daughter only a few weeks ago. And I hope the whole family received some comfort from the fact that we all loved him.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I knew David for perhaps 25 years, and for 8 years we were constituency neighbours when I was the MP for Hornchurch. And following on from one of the anecdotes given by the Honourable Member for Rayleigh and Wickford, I can remember David telling me a few times that there were a number of times when people would say on the doorstep, particularly in Basildon, "I'm going to vote for you, David, because you're a good Labour man." And I once said to him, "Did you ever put them right, David?" And he said, that was the closest I got to an answer, so I think we can all deduce from that he probably didn't put them right. We all know, I think we all know, that David was a hyper assiduous constituency MP, and the Honourable Member for Thurrock mentioned this, the pre-recess adjournment debates, and David and I were, for a long time, both contributors to seemed like every pre-recess adjournment debate. We used to call it Whinge and Gits Day, and for those of you who've taken part, those members who've taken part in those debates, they can all probably imagine why David and I would have called it Whinge and Gits Day. And there used to be a bit of a competition to see who could get in the greatest number of constituency topics into the debate. I don't think I ever won. I think David won every time. Every debate I was in, he won with 8, 9, 10 issues that he would cover in that sort of staccato way that he had. I just want to say one more thing about David, and that is that, on perhaps a more general point, there are profound and visceral issues that divide parties in this place and individuals, but they are minuscule compared to what divides us from the forces of darkness who brought this about. And just to say one more thing, and this is a deeply personal note, and this is on behalf of my wife Ellie and I, who's here, and that is that one thing I will always remember about David is that he would always ask about our sons, about our children, and how they were getting on, and that is something I will carry for the rest of my life.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to be, or I intend to be brief. After all, pretty much everything about David has been said, but that doesn't mean I can't repeat it. Can I just say, David, I knew him for 29 years when I first came in 1992. He was outstandingly and unfailingly kind, conscientious and generous, even to new members had arrived 8 years after him. And I remember it very clearly. I also remember later on, when I got to know him better, recalling that somebody in my constituency has referred to David when he was in Basildon as somebody that went always to the opening of an envelope. So I put this to him. I said, "You are accused of going to the opening of an envelope." And he said, "I damn well hope so, because I wrote it to them so I could go there in the first place." I also remember when they won Basildon Council, I think for the first time he was there. Not enough for David was it to just be with them when they went in. He formed a conga outside the chamber and took the whole of the newly elected councillors on a conga right the way through the council buildings and into the chamber. His sense of humour, Mr. Speaker, was always there, and it was always preceded by this megawatt smile that he could turn on like that. For most of us here in this chamber, it's hard work sometimes to be able to smile enough. But for David, it was hard work not to smile, and he would smile even in some of the most difficult circumstances. We already know, by the way, when I ceased being leader, I say with some respect to the honourable gentleman, no matter how much he's enjoying it now, it's really not cracked what it's cracked up to be, I have to tell him. That's what I thought too. I simply say that when I had to go and speak at an event for him, and he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Are you going all right?" I said, "Yeah, it's fine. And he got up and introduced me by saying, "I'm so pleased to have Ian Duncan Smith here. He's just slid down the greasy pole," and then he carried on. So he did follow that by telling me directly afterwards that he had retired finally from a long time in government, and he thought he would have more influence elsewhere. He actually spent a very short time in government, but that didn't bother him in the slightest bit. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that on a more serious note, David has shown us the way of cooperation. And I know for a fact that most members in this place know that you get things done by cooperating across this floor. In fact, very little is talked about that, Mr. Speaker, as you know, but it is in fact the embodiment of exactly who we are in this place. We cannot get stuff done by ourselves. So we form alliances, whether it's on modern-day slavery, whether it's, in my case, on gambling harms. You know, you go on, you form these alliances, and then you eventually move things and you get them done. But he was the architect of this. There wasn't an alliance that he couldn't form, even if there wasn't an issue on which he could form it. He would form it. And the point about this, Mr. Speaker, is I say this is who we are. We are often, as Joe Cox said, more united by the things we believe in than necessarily divided. The fact is that we are in this place because we argue with each other about our ideas. The important feature of this is we may disagree with our arguments, but we don't disrespect the motives of those who hold them. And we need to be very careful. This is a lesson to us, that we need to be careful here what we legitimize in what we say about our colleagues. They are not evil people. Nobody in this chamber is an evil individual. They have strong beliefs. I'm struck when the media reported that, you know, they'd finished talking about him, and then they said, and he was a man with very strong-held beliefs, as though this was an aside that they wanted to bury somewhere else. We come here because we have strong beliefs, and we should be proud of that. We argue with each other because we are the point where people can see us, debate these things, have power of emotion, be angry about them, because this place is a cockpit of that, so they don't have to do it outside violently elsewhere. But we need to show publicly, Mr. Speaker, I believe is what the point he was making, is that we need to show each other the respect that those ideas are greatly held. We respect each other, but we don't dislike or hate each other. That is not for us, and it is not for that that he in fact lost his life. In fact, today, through the door of my constituency office, Mr. Speaker, I've been told that there is in fact a document that came through the front page all about him, and on it it had, "Like you bastard." In fact, I did think he might have done it because it was spelt B-A-R-S-T-E-D, Mr. Speaker, so I think even in that threat there is a sense of irony. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, that his family, this is a tragedy which a deranged, hateful and violent individual has brought to them, unwarranted and without cause. And David taught us something very important, that they can remember, that he believed in the power, not the power of position, but the power of purpose. Mr. Speaker, they told us, Heraclitus, they told us you were dead. They brought me bitter tears to hear and bitter tears to shed. I thought as I was crying how often you and I had tired the sun with talking and sent him down the sky. And now that thou art lying, a pile of grey ashes, long, long ago dead, thy nightingales, thy voices are awake. And that is the important thing, Mr. Speaker. He will be with us forever.
Yeah. Can I just urge us to try and be brief to get plenty of others in? Vivek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just join briefly the tributes that we have heard, because Sir David Amess asked all of us about our families, and probably we send our condolences now to his family, not just from all of us, but from all of our families too, who will be feeling very much the need to reach out to them at this difficult time. We pay tribute to Sir David's staff, who just went to work on Friday morning, just like all of our staff do, going to try and help his constituents like every one of our constituents, and had to face the unimaginable on Friday morning. Every one of us has a story of things that we worked with David on. So many different issues. For me, it was the work we did together on amendments to help child refugees reunite with their families, something he felt strongly about. And you could never predict what the issue was going to be, he would feel strongly about next, but then you look back on it and think it made absolute sense that this was what he was championing, because so often kindness and compassion were at the heart of it, and for helping others too. His office is just above mine, so very often just chat to him, walking to the votes, coming across here, and really felt it just walking across here now to come and pay tribute to him, and knowing I wouldn't walk across here with him again, chatting about our families. But you could never get wrong which floor you were on, coming out of the lift to David's office. Because as many of you will know, there is hanging on his door a giant cardboard cutout of a knight in shining armour, with the helmet tilted in a jaunty way, just looking at you. And that knight in shining armour is what David will have been to so many of his constituents. Round the corner there is a box with the nodding reindeer decorations in, just ready to be spread across the corridors, because that was what David would do at Christmas time, would be just spreading joy, spreading a bit of friendship and a bit of joy. And if you stand there by that night today, you will also, Madam Deputy Speaker, I confess, hear the ethereal sound of birdsong as well, for so many reasons for David. And I think for all of us, look, Joe said to us, we have more in common than that which divides us. David showed us how to do that, because whilst he had disagreements with pretty much every one of us, he also had the unerring instinct of finding what it was he had in common with each and every one of us as well. And so when we face awful things happening, when we know that extremists try to divide us, we know that the most powerful thing that we have in our defence, in our armoury against them, and in defence of democracy, is the powerful words said on all sides of the House, in unity, in defence of democracy, but also in respect for David now.
John Whittingdale.
I first met David Amess nearly 40 years ago, shortly after his historic election as MP for Basildon, the image of which, the picture of his smiling face, came to symbolise the Conservative victory under Margaret Thatcher's leadership. He won because he embodied all that was best about Essex man. He was patriotic. He came from a working class background. He was devoted to his family. He was passionately independent. I got to know him when I was working for Margaret Thatcher in 10 Downing Street. He adored her. He was absolutely furious when she was removed from office, and indeed remained furious long after. And in 2013, he held an adjournment debate on her legacy following her death. She, in turn, hugely valued him. David championed many causes, as others have said, but most of all, he loved his constituency and the people that he was so proud to represent. My constituency is just about 30 minutes away from his, and a number of times I spoke for him at events, and he spoke for me. And the huge respect and affection in which he was held was always obvious. He loved meeting people, and he made sure that he spoke to every single person at whatever gathering he was present. As has been referred, it became a joke that for his first 14 years, he would make sure that in every question or in every speech, he referenced Basildon in ringing tones, as my honourable friend demonstrated in his contribution. And then after his election for Southend, his campaign for Southend to become a city again was mentioned at every opportunity. It's well known that he was a great animal lover and devoted to his dogs. And even when seeking support for his French dog, Vivian, in this year's Westminster Dog of the Year competition, as the Prime Minister referenced, the reason he gave as to why we should vote for Vivian as Westminster Dog of the Year was that she is an enthusiastic supporter of Southend becoming a city. So when in 2012, Chelmsford, as the county town of Essex, was granted city status, David took the news reasonably well. I can say, on behalf of my constituents in Chelmsford, how delighted we are that Essex now has 2 cities. I represent a part of the Chelmsford local authority area, but my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, has the city itself. She's unable to be here today as she's on ministerial duties abroad, but she asked me to say on her behalf how much she appreciated the kindness and gentle wisdom that David typically showed to her and other new Essex MPs when they were first elected. I also join in her in paying tribute to the work that David did for all of us to improve our hospitals across Mid and South Essex, a legacy that will continue to benefit hundreds of thousands of Essex residents. David was quite simply the best of us. All of us are still in shock, but our hearts go out to his family. And I hope that people will listen to their words. My honourable friend for Rayleigh spoke powerfully about the abuse that people, particularly members of Parliament, and not just MPs, a lot of other public servants, suffer from on online social media. I have been heartened by the huge number of messages that I have had from my constituents and from others, firstly to express condolences, and secondly just to express their appreciation of the work that we do in this place. And I like to think, and I strongly believe, that those horrible, aggressive voices that sometimes seem to dominate social media are not representative of the views of the vast majority of people who share all the qualities and would respond to the appeal of David's family, that we should show each other kindness and love. And that should be his lasting legacy.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've rightly been reminded of David's enthusiastic advocacy for the constituencies that he represented. But he was also an enthusiast for the London Borough of Newham, where he was born and grew up, where he attended the excellent St Bonaventure's Catholic School, which he stayed in touch with for the rest of his life, where he supported West Ham United Football Club, and where his mother lived until her death, as we've been reminded at the age of 104 5 years ago. I heard over the weekend from somebody who was in the sixth form at St Bonaventure's with David, but unlike David, supported the Labour Party. He told me that the politics teacher, Mr. Cunningham, predicted that David was going to be a Conservative MP. But he also told me that in a period when he wasn't able to attend quite a lot of the politics lessons, David very carefully wrote out all of his notes so that his friend could copy those notes afterwards. Kindness was evident at that early stage as well. David stood for election to the council in Newham in 1974 and 1978 and for Parliament in Newham North West in 1979 before finding more promising opportunities further east. But notwithstanding party differences, his supportive interest in Newham remained. As council leader from 1990, I pressed the Conservative government to bring the Channel Tunnel rail link through a station in Stratford. David was our unwavering ally on the government side. Single-handedly, he made the campaign cross-party, and that was crucial to its success, leading to London 2012, to the regeneration that's underway at the moment. Of course, David was not initially seen as a friend by my Newham Council colleagues, who haven't seen a Conservative elected for 30 years. We all remembered David dashing our 1992 general election hopes by holding Basildon. But we invited him to our town hall celebration when the Stratford campaign succeeded. I wasn't quite sure how that was going to go, but David won over everybody with a beautifully judged speech. Newham has lost a great friend. He was accessible to his constituents. Tragically, he has now given his life. We will rightly reflect on what more we can do to stop that happening again. I wonder if we might ask the police to review our appointment lists ahead of each surgery, for example. But we mustn't give up on the accessibility of members of Parliament. If we do, the sponsors of those who attacked David and who attacked me will have succeeded. That must not happen.
We would all like to have a long time to hear more of these heartwarming stories and recollections of our dear lost friend, but we are due to go to church quite soon. So I implore colleagues, please just take 2 minutes or so each, because then everyone will get a chance to say what they would like to say. Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've heard magnificent tributes from the Prime Minister, from the Leader of the Opposition, from David's Essex colleagues, and from many on the opposition benches as well. And I think we are all grateful for that. And the tone of the House is as the House can be at its best. I want to speak just a couple of minutes, speaking on behalf of the remnants of the class of '83. We came in, 100 of us, in 1983. Now there are, sadly, only 2 remaining with continuous service, and another 3 who have come back, having left the House briefly. We had all hoped and expected that in the fullness of time, once my right honourable friend, the member for Worthing, has surrendered his position, by which time, of course, David would have been a very old man. But we had hoped that he would become the father of the House, because he would have made a magnificent successor to my right honourable friend. Sadly and cruelly, that has been denied. Those of us, many on both sides of the House, who worked with David on his campaigns, had that privilege, whether that was on fox hunting when it was unfashionable to do so, whether it was on the reunification of Cyprus or Iran, or pensions for expat UK citizens, or a whole range of other issues. Know just what a doughty campaigner he was. And that clearly is why he was so loved in his constituency. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Speaker said at the weekend that David's death had left a void in this House, and of course he was absolutely right. There is another void in David's family home. I hope that David's wife, Julia, and his children will take comfort from the fact that across this house there is clearly nothing but affection for his memory. And that must speak volumes for the man whose life we celebrate today.
Yeah. Kim Leadbitter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've spent a lot of time over the weekend thinking about what to say if I got called today, or indeed whether to say anything at all, because I didn't know David personally. It's been a traumatic few days for many people, none more so than David's family and friends, and it's they who remain at the forefront of my mind this afternoon. But sadly, I know from my own all too similar experience that in reality there is nothing anyone can say to make things all right for them. But nor is it any use to stay silent. So I welcome this opportunity to pay tribute to someone who was clearly a well-respected and much-loved colleague to many people in this place. For reasons that I would never wish on any other member of this House, or indeed anyone, I do have a unique perspective on what those closest to David are going through, and I want to send them my love, support and solidarity from myself, my parents, our family and the people of Batley and Spen. I've blocked out much of what happened when Jo was murdered, but I remember very clearly the moment I took the phone call saying she had been attacked. I remember physically trembling and the visceral pain that overtook me, and it breaks my heart to think that another family has had to experience that phone call and the nightmare which follows. It's a roller coaster of deep trauma that no one should have to experience. I also know that David's family will still be in utter shock, as I know many of you are. But I hope at some point they are able to hear at least some of the beautiful and very funny tributes that are being paid to him today, and that will provide a morsel of comfort amidst their pain. I can't talk about David on a personal level. As I say, I didn't know him. But from what I've heard, he strikes me as the sort of MP who I may well have come across in the coming months and ended up going for a cuppa with him to hear his thoughts on the work he was doing on the Children's Parliament or animal welfare or getting more support for people with learning disabilities. We would have been two backbench MPs from different parties and different parts of the country discussing issues close to our hearts. And I imagine it would have been a lot of fun. But sadly, that day will never come. I know that wider discussions will now take place about the safety of MPs, the awful abuse and intimidation we face, the nature of political discourse, and how we can deal with the evils of terrorism. And it's quite right that they do. But today is about David and his family, along with his staff, colleagues, and the community he served so well, the service he gave, and the support we should show all of them in the coming days, weeks, and months. It is up to us to make sure that we do, because I know more than most that they will need it and the powerful difference it will make to them.
Sir David Amess.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And David was indeed a great character with a fantastic sense of humour, and I'm honoured to have been able to call him my friend. So much has already been said about him that I don't want to do repetition. But we were both elected to Parliament for the first time in 1983 with small majorities and became firm friends during the 1980s and shared an office together until '87 in the Abbey Gardens. We shared staff also for a while, and in those days the Commons sat very late, and I was fortunate to get to know David really well during this time. His cheerfulness and dedication were his hallmarks throughout his parliamentary career. His boundless energy, well, many of us couldn't keep up. And when he took us canvassing and campaigning in Basildon, we certainly couldn't keep up. Working together in the office, however, with David was quite an experience. As we've already heard, the menagerie of things that were in his office. But David also was never backward in coming forward. I remember going on the first occasion to a number 10 reception after we'd been elected, And of course, I was in awe of every Prime Minister, including the current one, of course. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister, and of course, she said, I can't do her accent, but she put her head on one side, the two Davids. And I just said, well, Prime Minister, lovely to be here, and all the rest of it. And David Amess said, well, I've never been here before, can you do me a tour? At that moment, I wish I had quietly died. But she said, yes, I'll come and get you later. And she did. We had a tour, and she said, but I'm going to take you upstairs to the flat and show you upstairs. And she said, this is where, of course, I cooked Dennis his breakfast. Really? He said, he has cooked breakfast? Yes, she said. Well, it's very pokey up here, isn't it? He didn't think much of it at all. So he never had aspirations to be Prime Minister, I think. Or if he did. At any rate, he was a friend. I was privileged to know him, privileged to work with him on so many campaigns. He was a great parliamentarian, a great politician, a fantastic advocate on behalf of his constituents, and a great champion of our nation. He was also one of the nicest, kindest, and most genuine people I've ever met. Always smiling, and was an indefatigable campaigner for all the many issues that he held dear. We're all devastated by his murder, and I'm privileged to know his wife and family over the years, and we think of them and we grieve with them. But we will remember his legacy, and we will look on the positive side, because one thing David Amess always was very positive. Yeah. And I'm proud to have known him. Thank you.
Yeah. Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If you had told me before I was elected in 2015 that just a few years later I'd be sitting at home greeting over the death of a Thatcherite Tory MP, I would not have believed you. But my partner Nadia and I did just that, for it was David who had died. David was the first cross-party friend I made in the Commons when I was elected. He was a joy to work with on committee, and he roped me into all sorts of APGs and escapades as well. And he will be sorely missed. He will not, however, be forgotten. And when I think back on my memories in this place, the most favourite ones will feature David. He already, I should say, features in a number of my Burn Supper speeches around a story of a haggis, but that's too long to tell in these short tributes. And I hope I can find the energy and the enthusiasm to tell it with the fun that it deserves. So let me just pay my respects to David and send my best wishes to his family. I cannot believe what they will be going through at this time. Thank you.
Sir Graham Brady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll be brief because I know there are many others who still want to pay their respects and give their tributes. As a dedicated and effective backbench Member of Parliament, it's right that I should pay tribute as Chairman of the 1922 Committee, but I wanted to say a few words today because I've, like so many others, had the privilege of his friendship for the last 24 years. And I'm deeply touched by the tributes that have been paid across the House, moving tributes from the Prime Minister and from the Leader of the Opposition. I'm pleased to follow my friend, the Chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party. My neighbour from Wythenshawe and Sale East, who was one of the first on Friday to get in touch with me to offer his condolences, which is much appreciated. And I think we all have had so many messages of condolence from constituents and others since that terrible news on Friday. I think people across the country could sense the goodness, the kindness, the decency of the man that we have lost. And I think it's wonderful we've had tributes to the great achievements that David had in politics. It's also wonderful that we've had so many references right from the start to the joy that David brought into all our lives and into so many other lives too. He clearly enjoyed the House of Commons, he enjoyed politics, he loved meeting people, and I hope that is something that will stay with us. I'll just say, finally, my recollection always, over the last few years especially, I'd see him in Portcullis House, he'd see me coming the other way, the infectious smile would begin, and you knew that he was looking forward to starting the conversation. What are they doing now, Graham? He'd say, and why are they doing this? And I will miss that. And like others, I'll still be looking out for him. And the final thing that I wanted to say, if you like the serious point, is that this is the most open and accessible Parliament of any major country in the world. And the right tribute to David must be that it remains so, that we will take sensible precautions, but we will keep open and we will continue to connect with our constituents as he did so brilliantly.
Sarah Dines.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is with incredible sadness, and I have to admit some anger, that I rise to pay tribute to my friend David today. I was fortunate enough to have known David before he entered this house, as a friend, a family friend, and some 3 decades later as a parliamentary colleague. My mother Elizabeth was his association chairman and at times election agent in Basildon, before, during and after the 1983 election. He was, of course, MP for Basildon as well as Southend, from Basildon from 1983 until 97. When I made my maiden speech last year, like many other members who came new to this house, he was there. He was seated just behind me. His face beamed with delight when I recalled as a teenager, when I'd been the YC representative on his committee that selected him to become the prospective Conservative candidate for Basildon in 1983. I remember then, not now, that young, that very enthusiastic candidate, a very good-looking, unconfirmed bachelor, with a flowing new romantic hairstyle. He fought a very energetic election campaign in '83 with a very, very small team of helpers. We all had our jobs. I made cups of tea. I was 16 or 17 at the time. We came back after a hard day's canvassing. My father, Tony, often had to go and find him. He'd be talking to somebody, or more often, he would just have run out of petrol. That was David. David was, of course, briefly, I'll just go on, a recipient of constant motherly advice from my mother, who was his chairman. It was, don't worry, of course you're going to win. You'd better get married now, David, and you need to have some children, right through to, you'd better get a haircut. Of course, he did win Basildon. He married the love of his life, Julia, and the children followed one after another in rapid succession, but he never did get that haircut. I know David as a showman. I could tell you numerous stories. I've had to throw most of the best ones away. But what I will say is that when I found myself on these benches following the last election, he was delighted. He went out of his way to settle me into the institution he loves so much. And I know that he mentored many others, not just me. And I speak on behalf of all of the 2019 intake and say how very sad we are to lose him.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd, and it is an honour to rise to speak on behalf of my party and to send commiserations to Sir David's family and friends and colleagues. And I think the one thing that I would really like to emphasise, I think for people outside, do not actually appreciate possibly how much we work together and how much of an honour it is to work together and how we, by that, achieve so much. And just the one other thing that I would like to say, I think for all of us here, just the reality of what democracy actually is. Democracy is what we have developed as the means that we do not no longer attack each other and use violence to achieve our aims. And when we see this terrible, abhorrent death which has struck us so badly and struck, of course, the constituents and so many people who knew Sir David so well, it has struck us so hardly that we remember that when we stand up for democracy, we are standing up for that, for civility and for good behaviour and for treating people properly, because historically the alternative has been violence. And violence must never be allowed to succeed again. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Natalie Elford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to pay respects to our dear colleague and my friend, Sir David Amess. I got to know David from 2017, when he reached out to me with that characteristic kindness. He had an extraordinary gift of knowing what to say, as well as when to say it. His many kindnesses provided a firm foundation for our work together on the Dame Vera Memorial Project. He was a Christian soul, a fellow Catholic, and his life fully reflected his beliefs. He also enjoyed life, he loved people, and had that lightness, a vivacity, an enthusiasm that drew people to him and was infectious. For so many months, we have been working together on the Dame Vera Memorial, foot the White Cliffs of Dover. He spearheaded this project from the very beginning. From similar working class backgrounds, we shared a commitment to creating opportunity and social mobility, so it made sense that the Dame Vera project is the centrepiece of our Levelling Up Fund bid for Dover, one that brings together opportunity, jobs, culture and entertainment. For as the House knows, David was a great entertainer as well as campaigner. My enduring memories of David will be both of us arm in arm around the piano singing to Dame Vera's songs, him taking selfies at the White Cliffs of Dover. The Dame Vera project was very close to David's heart. Sir David's family have made a call for public support for the Dame Vera fundraising in his memory. So let's get behind that and get the fundraising done, build the memorial and include in it a tribute to the life of Sir David Amess, a lovely man who was a true friend to me, a friend to Dover and to our nation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join the tributes to the Honourable Member for Southend West, who was a kind and generous colleague in the House and a committed and conscientious constituency MP. Just how conscientious he was can be seen in his record of speaking and action in the House. I had a recollection of him speaking in a pre-recess adjournment debate back in 2009 when I was Deputy Leader of the House, and it was my job to respond to that debate. And a couple of the speeches earlier we've heard about these Sir David's performance of these debates. I remembered that Sir David had raised many, many points that day to be answered or sent for action in departments. So I looked back at the pre-Christmas recess adjournment debate in December 2009. I found this amazing list of matters which Sir David raised with me. His view of then Labour government, the state of the economy, small shops, having visited every small shop in his constituency in the summer recess, the pay of public servants and the scrutiny of public sector pay, communications with his chief constable and decision-making structures in the police, our forces serving in Afghanistan, the Chilcot inquiry, solvent abuse, Vioxx and compensation for UK users of it, tax credits and the tax credits helpline, the Southend Association of Voluntary Services and funding for them, services for people with rheumatoid arthritis, seat belts and the risks of people not wearing them. And he concluded, as it was the pre-Christmas adjournment debate, this impressive list by talking about the issues of unwanted pets at Christmas and the work of the International Fund for Animal Welfare. I have to say to my honourable friend, the member for Leighton and Wanstead, that was 15 issues. The reason he beat you in these debates is it wasn't 8, 9 or 10. That's why he won. So, I fast forwarded to the most recent pre-recess adjournment debate on 26th of July this year just to see if it was a similarly impressive list, and it was. Care costs, both of self-payers and council-funded costs, the accessibility of housing for people with a disability, use of tidal power, the safety of jet skis, single-use plastics, sewage discharge from storm overflows, planting of trees in Southend for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, banning live export of animals for slaughter, the pension ombudsman, approaches to working with vulnerable children, the public appeal for a permanent memorial in Dover to Dame Vera Lynn, which he helped to launch, good wishes for our Olympic and Paralympic athletes, praise for a constituent who had done a wing walk for charity, centenary of the British Legion, and, as ever, Mr. Speaker, a plea to make Southend a city. How wonderful that his strongest campaign for city status at Southend will happen, the city he loved, and thanks to Her Majesty for approving that. Mr. Speaker, I'll finish by saying this. There were so many causes that Sir David championed, and so many of us worked cross-party with him on issues such as support for people with endometriosis. There was going to be a debate on that today, and children with learning disability. David's family have asked us to renew our commitment to the many causes he championed. It is a heartwarming tribute to David's work that Southend will become a city. We will continue that tribute by renewing and carrying on the work he started.
Mr. Speaker, may I begin by giving my condolences and prayers to his wife Julia and his 5 children. Mr. Speaker, not only did Sir David represent the people of Southend West and was a dedicated campaigner on a broad range of issues, achieving some real meaningful changes, he also spent a great deal of time representing this House and overseas delegations, and this is what I want to focus on this afternoon. Sir David was an active member of the IPU, the CPA, and a number of APPGs, including the APPG for the Holy See, and it was on delegations like this that I first got to know Sir David well. It's well documented that Sir David was a devout Catholic, but even in the hallowed walls of the Vatican, Sir David did not lose his mischievous sense of humour. I think of a time when we were in the Vatican for the canonisation of Cardinal Newman, which has already been referred to, and we attended a high-browed theological seminar with cardinals. Midway through, David whispered to me, "Isn't this fabulous? I can see you're loving it." To which I replied, "To be honest, not really, David. I'm not really understanding it." And it was at the tea break that David and I slipped out like errant schoolboys. I said to him, "David, are we not going to get into trouble walking through the Vatican gardens?" He said, "Nah." And no, we did. But as you're aware, Mr. Speaker, not all meetings are engaging or go according to plan. And I remember vividly a meeting with a foreign minister. In this case, a foreign minister that demanded that the meeting take place in English. The only problem being that that foreign minister did not actually speak English, but had instructed his translators not to intervene. Several minutes in, with only the minister understanding what had been said, and parliamentary colleagues becoming increasingly frustrated, I passed David a note saying that this was getting ridiculous. David simply smiled in his usual way. About a minute later, Sir David leant forward and said to the minister, "Minister, your English is superb. Where did you study?" With tears rolling down colleagues' cheeks and nobody able to make eye contact for fear of damaging the reputation of this House. But this was a perfect example of Sir David deploying his full sense of humour and ability to address serious situations in a polite and jovial tone. Mr. Speaker, just last week, I and others in this House had the privilege of spending time with Sir David on a parliamentary delegation he was leading. He was at his very best, ensuring that colleagues of all levels of seniority were made to feel included and that they played an active role. Every day we conducted serious business, but he made sure we always found time to laugh. It will come as no surprise that even there he found time to demand that Southend be made a city. This House has lost a great representative, his family, a father and husband. I have lost a dear friend, but it was a real privilege to be with him on his final adventure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think if David had been here to hear the word today, he would have loved the fact that there was so much humour in the contributions from people, as well as the obvious warmth and respect for his decency. I think, it's just so obvious how genuine the tributes are. I knew him fairly well because of working with him on animal welfare issues, and all I really want to do today is to just quote from some of the animal welfare groups that have paid tribute to him on social media. World Animal Protection talked about his support for calls for an end to the global wildlife trade. The Dogs Trust said that they were devastated to hear of his death. He worked with them on supporting the end to the cruel puppy smuggling trade. The Animal Aid posted a picture of him supporting a call for an end to a ban on, or calling for a ban on game bird battery cages, said that they were shocked and sad and described him as a friend to animals everywhere. And I feel particularly for the Blue Fox campaigners, which is the Conservative campaign against fox hunting. And when that was first established, only a very few MPs on the Conservative benches were supporters of that. And Sir David was so integral, and he's got us to a place now where it's really, I think, a bit of a moot point whether there would ever be a successful attempt to overturn the fox hunting ban, and that's because we've managed to win the debate on both sides of the House rather than just on this side, and he was just so much a part of that. Peter, another animal welfare campaign, have said that they're going to add a leaf with his name on it to their Tree of Life memorial, which celebrates individuals who've made a difference, and they say that he did that in spades. And finally, I just want to, there was a lovely tribute to him from Nick Palmer, who was an MP on the Labour side in this House and overlapped with him for quite some time, but he's now at Compassion in World Farming. And he wrote a lovely article in the last few days, and he said he was especially struck by Alistair Campbell's comment that the first thing you noticed when David entered the room was his beaming smile, and that many of us, that not many of us are remembered in politics, are remembered especially for our smiles. And he which I think is fair to say. But he concluded, Nick, in this article, he said, when animal sentience is officially on the statute book, when live exports end, when cages on farms are banished to history, all of us in the animal welfare movement will celebrate, and we should remember the quiet idealism that made Sir David help bring it about.
Sir Benedict.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this debate, the life of David Amess keeps invoking one word above all: kindness. Yes. And the family's heartrending statement reflected that word. The Archbishop of York wrote that his life showed the true meaning of kindness. And this would be the greatest of all tributes to David if we, or even just some of us, who are engaged in the daily political battle, made kindness our resolution from this day forward. There is much reaching across the chamber in this debate today, but which of us in this House can honestly say, when we have looked across the chamber, or those in our own parties, that we have never fallen prey to feelings of contempt or lack of respect or unkindness towards those who oppose us? Which of us can honestly say we cannot do better? Kindness is giving without any expectation of getting. Kindness inspires hope and optimism, which David also embodied. Like many on all sides, we had our disagreements, but nobody could doubt David's sincere wish to make the world a better place with his kindness. And I wonder why the 7 principles of public life do not include the principle of kindness. And henceforth, let kindness be known as the David Amess principle of public life. He, Julia, and the rest of his family could bequeath the nation nothing more generous, and we could do no greater service to them and to David's memory than to learn to live this principle more evidently in our daily political lives.
Final contribution, Dr. Rupert.
Mr. Speaker, the brutal killing of our friend David Amess, and I call him a friend. I know that we have an adversarial workplace here, we have a face-off, don't we? But some of our best friends often are on the other side, aren't they? I know when I've been in a hole, sometimes it's people on that side who've sort of helped me out and been friendly to me. It's all the more shocking to me and painful because I'm probably certainly the last Labour MP who saw him alive. And it was on that delegation to the Middle East last week. At the baggage reclaim, as it happens. Everyone else had scarpered, everyone else's stuff had gone. Mine, I think I'd missed because I'd been tying up my shoelaces or something. He said, no, I'll wait with you. I was like, come on, you've got to go to Essex. Be off with you. But, you know, that was the measure of the man, how kind he was. And the next day, when the last stragglers were sort of saying, we got back, it was a great trip, thank you. He was the last WhatsApp I saw, thanking everyone for their service. And how shocking that he was taken in service, a public servant, in the line of duty, slain at his surgery. I mean, on the trip, again, his $1 million smile that we've heard so much about won over everyone. One of these dignitaries I had to introduce him to, and I said, you know, he's been a parliamentarian since the last century, but he never ages. And another one, he said, in his inimitable way, oh, do you know what? I thought I had a lot of kids because I've got 5, but you've got 24. And he'd said to us in advance on the coach, ladies, when we get there, I don't want any ruffling of his hair, any sitting on his lap, any twiddling of his tie, because he's already got 3 wives and he doesn't need any more. Anyway, look, everyone's got so many Amessisms, and I was with him for a week, so I miss him dearly. I was shocked. I could not process that news. I had to go and do my own in-person surgery at the time. When I got on the panel of chairs, he said, you should be a shadow minister by now. No comment. But anyway, look, he didn't want... Get that. he didn't want, you know, party profferment, and nor do I in that case. And so look, when our dear friend, and it was so brilliant to hear from Kim, who's a dear friend already in a short space of time, when Joe Cox was taken from us, we all said that we should live by the diktat of more in common. I feel in life we should be all a bit more like David, and that means being less cross and more cross-party. Thank you.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. We will now follow the Sergeant at Arms to process to St Margaret's Church for the service of remembrance. But can I say, for MPs and staff who wish to watch the service at St Margaret's, it will be live on the Annunciator channel 505. Yeah, that's something going to be. We want to meet through.
Bad luck he didn't get in. The only Essex MP didn't get in.
I